Hello and welcome guys. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy. This is Affinity: Chaos. Chapter 321. Frost City. Rice family villa. A carriage could be seen entering the compound through the front gate. Donald and Gray were sitting inside the carriage. The atmosphere in the carriage was a little tense. On the way here, none of them had spoken a word. Back at Gerald's office, Gray took the risk of telling Donald the name of the treasure, since Donald said if he didn't tell him, he wouldn't tell him where Alice is. "How are things there?" Gray asked Void, who was still watching over Gerald. "Okay, his daughter seems to have a bad impression of you though. All she does is complain about you. Should I, take her out?" Void asked. "No need. If things work out well, then I'll be out of here later today. I've already gotten some ideas on how to make the communication device. All I need to do is make it as I head over to Alice." Gray rejected the idea of Void killing Gerald's daughter. He couldn't say he liked her, but he didn't really hate her to the extent of killing her. He naturally knew not everyone would like him, so he wasn't bothered by her hate. A few minutes later, they got to the building. Gray and Donald highlighted the carriage. Coming out of the carriage, Gray was greeted by a familiar face. "Zeke Hoover, I didn't think the next time we'd meet would be in my family compound," Sasha said with a smile. "Hello, are you sure you're not stalking me?" Gray asked with a smirk. "It's my family compound. I should be the one saying this," Sasha replied. "Well, given how you're the one who always comes to me, I doubt that." Gray replied with a shrug. "Dad, what's he even doing here?" Sasha turned to her father. "He's the reason the Emperor is searching for Sasha." Donald pointed at Gray before walking into the building. "That's an odd way to introduce someone," Gray complained quietly. "Huh, you're Gray, Alice's friend?" Sasha asked in surprise. Gray nodded before following behind Donald. "Wait, then why did you say your name was Zeke Hoover?" Sasha asked as she chased after them. Gray raised his shoulders as if saying, "I have no idea what you're talking about." "So you came here because of Alice? Sorry to burst your bubble, but she isn't in the city," Sasha said with a smirk when she saw him not responding to her. "Why do you think I'm here?" Gray tilted his head to the side and asked. Donald took Gray to an office before taking a seat. Sasha followed them into the office as well. "Dad, you want to tell him where Alice is? You even refused to tell me," Sasha asked. "Since you're here, I'll tell you as well," Donald said while looking at Gray and Sasha. "Alice is in the building," he said in a low voice. Gray raised a brow in suspicion, while Sasha looked at her father in confusion. But I saw her leave before the Emperor's people came." Sasha stood up from the couch. "I got the intel that the Emperor would be sending people over, so I made a ruse, so everyone would think she really left the city. Only I and your uncle know she's in this building," Donald explained. The reason why Alice's light dot was in the building suddenly dawned on Gray. "She's hidden somewhere in the building, no wonder," he muttered to himself. "Yes, there's an underground room in the building. This is known only by a few people I know would rather die than to say anything about this to just enemies." Donald looked at Gray and Sasha with a serious expression. "Can I see her?" Gray asked. "No, I only told you I'll tell you where she is. I didn't say I'd allow you to see her. The only reason I agreed to tell you was because you took the risk of telling me what I wanted to know." Donald refused. "If you wouldn't let me see her, then why did you tell me she's here?" questioned Gray. "Firstly, because I promised to tell you where she is. Secondly, where is it?" Donald looked in Gray's direction with cold eyes. Gray looked at his cold eyes before smirking. "I don't have it. I only acquired 4, and I distributed it between myself and my friends. I don't think you understand the weight of your current situation. Now, let me rephrase myself. Hand it over, or die." Donald placed his right hand on the table before he started tapping it repeatedly. The sudden change in Donald's attitude stunned Sasha. She was just about to ask him to take them to Alice when he suddenly started threatening Gray. "Like I initially said, I don't have it. Moreover, do you think I'd be stupid enough to take something like that with me wherever I'm going?" Gray replied with a calm expression. Donald squinted his eyes before unleashing the pressure of his cultivation plane in Gray's direction. The close distance between them made Gray feel the pressure firsthand. It was completely different from the one the woman from the Smith family sent his way. But in the face of the chaos orb which he had absorbed, it was nothing. As soon as the pressure came his way, Gray noticed his elemental beads would revolve on their own, before sending out an aura that only he could sense. Once the pressure comes in contact with the aura, it fades instantly and passes through him. It was like he was never there. He didn't notice this when the woman from the Smith family did this to him. Maybe it was because she was only in the first stage of the Overlord plane. An ability to negate pressure from those in higher planes than me. This is new, he thought to himself with a smile. Donald looked at him with a weird expression, not expecting he would be smiling when he unleashed his pressure on him. It must be because of the treasure. Nothing else can make someone in a lower plane feel so calm against my pressure, he thought as greed flashed through his eyes. Chapter 322. Dad, what are you doing? Sasha yelled in terror. Stay out of this, Sasha. What he has can take a family to the top of the empire. No, the world. Donald replied before standing up. He's Alice's friend, and he said he gave it to her as well. Wouldn't that mean that Alice can help us? Sasha tried to stop her father from doing what he wanted to do. Sasha, what if he's lying? Then what? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We cannot let it go, Donald explained. He's friends with Alice. You can't just make him an enemy when you can turn him into a friend. Sasha stood in front of Gray, who was still sitting down. Oh, drama, how entertaining. To think the child is more pragmatic than the parent. Gray thought to himself. He wasn't the least bit bothered Donald would try to kill him. First of all, Donald needed the treasure, and only he knew where it was. Secondly, he already had a plan against this before coming. Sasha, you don't understand what's happening. The family isn't what it used to be. Why do you think we placed so much hope on Alice? If what he said is true, then Alice should already have the legendary violet elemental grade. What do you think would happen if she refines another one of the treasures? Donald explained to Sasha. Violet grade. Sasha said in shock. Yes. What he has can improve elemental grades. Why do you think Alice improved so much within such a short time? If she could improve it again, then wouldn't she grow stronger faster? Donald continued speaking. A piece of advice. I don't think Alice would like the fact that you're threatening me. Gray suddenly spoke up. He was tired of hearing Donald's justification. Greed will always have its way of manipulating people, he thought to himself. I don't care if she hates me. I'll shoulder it all. But what I know is that she will not stand by and watch the family wither away. Donald continued speaking. No, I'm not in support of this idea of yours. Sasha stood in front of Gray, in a bid to protect him. No need to waste your time. He's already corrupted by greed. Gray held Sasha's shoulder before moving her to the side. After pushing her away, he added, and besides, he wouldn't dare to kill me. It's good you're cooperating, Donald said. Who said I'm cooperating? I'm only moving her away so I could look at you properly, Gray said, before adding, I don't have the treasure, and on behalf of Alice, I'm disappointed in you. Donald looked away when he heard Gray say he was disappointed in him on behalf of Alice. He knew Gray was right. Doing this will most likely make Alice hate him forever. But this was a burden he was willing to bear for the family. If Alice could be the strongest, they will not only go to the top, but they would even rule the world. A chance for his family to rule was not something he would allow a little hatred deter him from. Had Alice not absorbed the first one, then he would have absorbed them himself. But since she had absorbed it, he felt it was more rational for her to use both. Sasha, go outside and lock the door, he ordered. Dad. Sasha, now. Donald ordered more authoritatively this time. Sasha turned away from her father with disappointment in her eyes before heading out. She couldn't even look at Gray because she felt ashamed of her father. Alice had told her of Gray and the others, so she was naturally looking forward to seeing one of Alice's friends. Never would she have expected it would turn out this way. Her father was threatening Gray's life for the benefit of her family. Bang. She slammed the door as she left, not bothering to lock it. Where did you keep it? Donald asked. Like I said the first time, I don't have any more. Also, from what you said, I believe you should be building bridges, not burning them. Gray said coldly, semicolon. I cannot leave the future of my family in the hands of a stranger, because he's my daughter's friend. Donald replied, semicolon. He naturally understood what Gray meant by what he said, but to him, he trusted his family more than outsiders. If anything were to happen, before anyone else would lend a hand, his family would be the one to fight first. Semicolon. I'll forget you threatened my life on account of my friendship with Alice. I do not have any more, and your daughter should know how highly I value my relationships. Would I take the risk of coming here if I didn't value her life? Think about it. Gray said, a little annoyed by Donald's behavior. Semicolon. This is the last time I'm asking. Where is it? Donald didn't give in to his words. Semicolon. There's no more. You can ask your daughter if you think I'm lying. Gray replied with folded arms. Semicolon. HMPH. Then you're of no use. Donald snorted angrily before waving his hand. Gray was sent flying by the force that was generated from that simple movement. Semicolon. Bang. Semicolon. He slammed into the wall of the office, creating a crevice in it. He didn't see Donald making use of any elements, yet just the force of his hand's movement sent him flying. Semicolon. Is this the power of someone in the Overlord plane? He asked himself. Semicolon. This was the first time he was being attacked by someone in the Overlord plane. To think it would turn out to be his friend's father. Semicolon. Donald looked at Gray a little surprised. He could tell Gray wasn't hurt by what he just did. The force he generated from that simple motion could kill a peak arcane plane elementalist and wound an origin plane elementalists. Semicolon. I really didn't hope it would get to this. Chapter 323. I really didn't hope it would get to this, Gray said casually before turning towards the door to the surprise of Donald. Where do you think you're going? Donald asked with a long face. My ride's here. I'm heading back to Old Man's Gerald's villa. Gray replied before placing his hand on the doorknob. Donald was about to attack to stop him from leaving, before his expression suddenly changed. And you looked outside. Whoosh. Bang. Sorry. I had to destroy the window. Master Gerald will cover for the cost of the destruction, a middle-aged man said after flying through the window into the office. The man stood between Gray and Donald as soon as he came in. When Donald saw the man, his face turned darker. Dillick, what's the meaning of this? He asked coldly. Nothing. I was sent to ensure his safety. Dillick shrugged before pointing at Gray. This is the Rice family compound. Do you really think only you can stop me? Donald asked coldly. Of course not. I was only sent to show you how serious Master Gerald is. For the safety of the boy, he doesn't mind going against a dying family. Dillick said nonchalantly. Gray opened the door and walked out of the office to the dismay of Donald. He wanted to stop him, but he knew he couldn't since Dillick was there. Dillick was regarded as one of the best geniuses Frost City had ever produced. He broke through to the Overlord plane at the tender age of 26. Which was the youngest in the history of the entire city. He wasn't from any of the big families, rather, he was groomed by the Lens organization. Old Man Gerald personally groomed him. He could be said to be Gerald's greatest asset. Sending him was a message to Donald. If anything happened to Gray, then he should prepare for a war he definitely cannot win. Donald stared at the disappearing view of Gray, regret flashing through his eyes. He initially didn't think the relationship between Gray and Gerald would be this close. From his years of contact with Gerald, he didn't think he would take the risk of sheltering someone who the Emperor wanted to kill. For him to do this means the boy has someone terrifying behind him. Either that or the boy promised him something he thought to himself. He just created an enemy out of greed. It was just as Gray said. This was time for building bridges, not burning them. But now he burned down a really important one. Sigh. I hope Alice would understand. I only did it for the family. Donald sighed before sitting down on his chair. He seemed to have aged a bit just from the fear of who might be behind Gray, and how he would face his daughters again. Had his plan worked, he would have felt it was worth it. But now, he gained nothing from it. Outside Donald's office, after Gray left, he saw Sasha running towards the office hurriedly, almost bumping into him. You're okay? Sasha asked in surprise when she saw Gray walking out. Yeah, shouldn't I be? Gray looked at her strangely. But my dad. Sasha looked behind him, trying to catch a glimpse of the office. before the door shut completely. He let me go, I said it earlier. He wouldn't dare kill me. Gray waved it off. He just let you go? Sasha asked again. Surprise and confusion were very evident in her face. Yup, after speaking to him for a while, he decided to let me go. Gray nodded with a smile. That's strange. My dad isn't one who would easily change his decision, Sasha said in doubt. She knew her father all too well. Changing his mind was something she had never seen occur before. Once he's made up his mind to do something, especially one that he thinks is for the good of the family, he would never go against it, no matter what. I'm a very capable talker. Although it was a little difficult, I was able to convince him in the end. Gray beat his chest in confidence. That has never happened before. Sasha still had some doubts about Gray's claim. She was finding it very difficult to believe. What if what I offered would greatly benefit him and your family? Do you think he wouldn't change his mind? Gray said with a curious smile. Well, if it would benefit the family, he would change his mind. Sasha nodded thoughtfully. If it was just as Gray said, then her father would change his mind. I'm sorry for how he treated you earlier, she said after a while with her head hung low. Even if you managed to convince my father, he wouldn't apologize for what he did, she added. Gray looked at Sasha before shaking his head wryly. If only Sasha knew he was lying. He could tell she was greatly disappointed in her father. This was why he said this. This was Alice's family after all. He didn't want to be the cause of a conflict between them. Don't let Alice know of what happened today, okay? Given her fiery temper, I don't know what she would do, he said with a wry smile. If she was strong enough, she would attack her father, Sasha said with certainty to Gray's surprise. What? Gray exclaimed. He didn't think Alice would do that, but seeing how certain Sasha looked, he felt she might be right. Has she attacked him before? He couldn't help but ask before he continued walking. The only reason he stood close to Donald's office while speaking with Sasha a few moments ago was to let him know he didn't really want anything bad for the family. He would get revenge later in the future. Well, that all depends on how things pan out. If Donald continued being the dickhead he currently was, then he wouldn't mind teaching him a thing or few when he had grown stronger than him. But if he changed, maybe, just maybe he might let him go. Donald's office. Donald and Dillick heard Gray and Sasha's conversation. Donald's hand was currently shaking from disappointment. He looked at his shaking hands in surprise. Thank you, he muttered quietly. To think you attacked him earlier, Dillick said before heading towards the window. Goodbye, I'll send people over to fix the door. Chapter 324. Wait, why did she attack him again? Gray asked stunned as he exited the building with Sasha. Because he refused to tell her a story, Sasha replied with a chuckle. If I remember correctly, you said she was only 5 at the time, right? Gray asked in shock. Sasha laughed out when she saw the expression on Gray's face, before nodding. Looks like she has been this way since she was young, Gray thought as he shook his head on hearing about Alice's antics while she was younger. They soon walked to the villa gate. Well, I'll have to go now before your dad snaps again. It was nice speaking to you. Also, no need to ask. He didn't agree to let me see Alice, Gray said when he saw the questioning look on Sasha's face. He waltzed out of the villa, stepping into the carriage Gerald sent to get him outside the Rice family compound. How did you know he would attack you? Gerald asked as soon as Gray stepped into the carriage. Simple, I've been doing my research on the Rice family since I came here, and acquainting myself with the Earl's sisters helped a lot, Gray replied. Before leaving Gerald's office, he notified Gerald to get another device he could use to contact him. That way, if things went south, he could quickly contact him. He found out from Void that Gerald was truly scared of his teacher, so he knew he could count on him if his life were in danger. Seeing how quickly he reacted, he couldn't help but feel impressed. Fear truly is a powerful tool. Did you get what you wanted? Asked Gerald. Gray nodded but didn't speak any further. He couldn't take the risk of telling Gerald. He might trust him with his life because of his teacher, but not with Alice's. Good. How long will you be staying in the city? Gerald asked. I need to stay a little longer. As soon as I'm done with my research, I'll leave, replied Gray. Okay, but I believe the Emperor will already be aware of your presence in the city. The mayor here is one of his lackeys, Gerald said. I know, I have a plan that will solve that, Gray said before telling Gerald his plan. It wasn't really his plan per se, Rather, it was Donald's plan. He would pretend to leave the city just like Alice, before sneaking back in. That's a brilliant idea, Gerald praised when he heard of his plan. Yeah, I need to be carefree while I'm working, so that's the best thing to do, Gray said. Okay, we'll go ahead with your plan, just inform me when you're ready, Gerald said after a while. I'll leave as soon as we get back to the villa, Gray said. He wanted to stay behind for 2 reasons. Firstly, to make the communication device. The second reason made him feel more excited than the first reason. It was because he could feel he was very close to comprehending the space element. Even till now, a place for the space element hasn't appeared in the chaos space, unlike the darkness element. He felt a little enthusiastic about the prospect of using the space element. Once he comprehends it, he would try to see if he could sneak into the Rice Villa. With Void as his teacher, he would be able to quickly grasp the element once he comprehends it. When they got to the villa, Gray left the carriage and headed straight to the hotel he previously stayed in. He wanted to retrieve his horse before heading out. 20 minutes later, Gray could be seen leaving Frost City riding on his horse. He soon disappeared into the horizon. 1 hour later, looks like they followed me all the way here. Gray, who was currently sitting under a tree, muttered quietly. Come out. I know you're here, he said. 5 men walked out of the bushes. Looking at them, he recognized one of them because of the scar under his eyes. They were the group who followed him after he spoke with Sasha the first time. Why are you following me? Gray asked nonchalantly. To kill you. Attack. The man who was the youngest of the group said immediately, without even giving Gray time to prepare himself. Unfortunately for them, he had already prepared himself before he called out to them. 3 symbols lit up in the sky before attacking the group. Gray attacked with his fire element as well, while moving at a terrifying speed to escape the attacks the group sent his way. Boom, bam, bang. One of the men was hit by Gray's attack, and was immediately sent flying. This has always been one of Gray's specialties when fighting, taking out an opponent with the first strike. His explosive speed and strength is very hard to defend against, especially when his opponent knew nothing of him. When the others from the group looked at the man who was sent flying, they were shocked to see a hole in his chest. Dead, one of the men said in surprise. The man with the scar immediately turned to look at Gray. You bastard, I'll kill you. What did you originally plan to do if not kill me? Gray asked with a smirk before attacking once again. After he broke through, he felt even more confident against the group. Although he knew he couldn't defeat them quickly, he was certain of being able to kill them all. With the high amount of elemental essence he has in store, he wasn't scared of the group being able to defeat him in a battle of attrition. Added with the blue vest, he wasn't scared of being hit by any of their attacks. Dillick followed behind him to ensure his safety. He initially wanted to attack the group, but Gray told him to stay put. Gray made sure to use only 2 elements, the ones Gerald saw him using in the birthday ceremony. The fight went on with Gray constantly being on the attack against the group. Chapter 325. Bang! A figure crashed into the ground to form a crater. How is he this powerful? The man with a scar under his eyes asked with dilated pupils. He couldn't believe a youth of Gray's age would be this powerful. What was more shocking was that Gray was 2 stages below him, and he wasn't the only one in the 8th stage of the origin plane. Of the group of 5, currently 2 were in the 8th stage, while the other 2 were in the 6th and 7th stage respectively. The last man who Gray had already killed was in the 7th stage as well. They had heard of Gray's might when he battled against William at Gerald's birthday ceremony, but seeing his strength firsthand was shocking, to say the least. Escape, we have to escape and report this. The man with a scar quickly came to a decision. They were all people who usually walk the line between life and death. The job they did require this, so they naturally knew they would die one day or another. Scatter, the man with the scar said after raising an ice wall to block Gray's fire arrows. Boom. The fire arrows quickly made short work of the ice wall, easily melting it. As soon as the wall was destroyed, the group who were on their feet quickly made a break for it, leaving the guy Gray's strike hit not too long ago behind. Like I'll let you leave, Gray scoffed before spreading out both hands. 4 symbols lit up in the air. The symbols were all positioned in 4 different locations, forming a large 250 meters square in the sky. Seal. Gray spat out and lines shot from the symbols into the ground. The symbols were currently hanging at least 200 meters in the sky, but it didn't take up to a second before the lines touched the ground. After the 4 lines simultaneously touched the ground, they immediately started spreading towards the left and right. Before long, they completed a square, trapping Gray and his opponents, before they were able to leave the area. Bam! Boom! 3 attacks rang out from 3 different locations, but the results were the same. Not even a scratch could be seen on the barrier-like cube the light made. Gray casually walked to the center of the square, not too far from where the 4th man was lying on the ground, injured. There's no escape for any of you. This thing can withstand an all-out attack of a peak origin plane elementalist. I don't think any of you can match that. His voice was gentle, but it managed to travel easily across the 200 square meters. During the past months when Gray was in his teacher's valley trying to create the device, he was struck with an idea after working with so many arrays. When the idea struck him, he immediately implemented it. He would make a trapping array, which would be fueled by his inscriptions that were mid-air. Being proficient in arrays, and also learning more about it from his research, he was able to quickly make some progress on it. It took him all through the time he was in the valley, when he searched for Reynolds, and on his way to Frost City, before he was able to successfully complete it. After successfully making it, he naturally instantly tried out its defense. It didn't disappoint him as his all-out attack with the fire element was easily stopped by it. He attacked a few more times with it, but the seal held on and remained perfectly fine. The 3 men who were trying to break it turned to look at him in fear. They had already given up on the idea of beating him, but yet he still didn't want to let them escape. What do you want?" the injured man asked, stuttering. "To kill you all, obviously," Gray replied nonchalantly. He didn't really care about these people, although he looked emotionless because of how quickly he decides to kill his enemies. He never regrets his decision. Friends are friends, and enemies are meant to be killed. If not, they will come back and hurt you. Gray stretched out his right hand, pointing his index finger at the man. Under the horrified gaze of the man, a small fire beam started forming at the front of his finger. Swoosh! The fire beam shot straight at the man, creating a small hole on his forehead. Thud! The man who was trying to stand up collapsed on the ground, dead. The trio who were still trying to break the ceiling array were forced to group together once again. "Let's fight till the end. He wouldn't be able to support this thing for too long. Added with the burden of fighting 3 of us together, he'll wear out soon," one of the men said after the group came together once again. The other 2 nodded simultaneously. They felt his conjecture was right. Keeping something this powerful running would need a high amount of concentration and energy, and they don't think anyone would be able to keep it for a long time. If it were others, then they would be right. But for me, Gray chuckled inside. He could keep this thing up for at least 10 minutes. That was more than enough time he needed to deal with these guys. If they decided to attack the seal, on the other hand, it wouldn't be able to last 3 minutes. The danger of them attacking the seal, however, was that they would be open to his assault, so trying to break it didn't seem plausible. Boom! The man with a scar was the first to attack. Ice spikes sprung out of the ground where Gray was standing, trying to impale him. Gray immediately mobilized his wind element, maneuvering through the multiple ice spikes that were sprouting out of the ground by a hair's breadth. While Gray was dodging the ice spikes, the other 2 men attacked as well. One was a wind elementalist, while the other was an earth elementalist. The earth elementalist followed the water elementalist's lead, and also attacked with earth spikes, while the wind elementalist sent wind blades towards Gray, who was currently trying to dodge both the ice and earth spikes. Damn, these guys are tough. Chapter 326. Crash. Boom. Gray occasionally destroys the spikes he couldn't dodge with his fire element. Swoosh! With a huge leap, he leapt out of the area where the water and earth elementalist focused their attacks on, hoping to escape from their assault, so he could start his. "Just what I've been waiting for." The water elementalist smirked when Gray went airborne. "Don't let him back on the ground," he commanded the others. Gray might be powerful, but compared to these seasoned veterans, he still had a lot to learn in terms of battle experience. The wind elementalist was the first to attack Gray while he was mid-air. He sent out multiple wind blades his way, before sending out a small tornado behind them. The water and earth elementalists attacked as well. The earth elementalist created what looked like a pillar that he swung in Gray's direction, trying to smack him with it, while the water elementalist created a water blob under Gray, which shot out small droplets of water at Gray. All three people attacked within the short time frame. Gray leapt into the air. It didn't even take up to a second after the man with the scar commanded before they attacked. Shit. Gray, who was still mid-air, immediately cursed out when he saw the pincer attack of the group. He stretched out his left hand, and like a missile, it shot out a powerful air current that shot Gray out of the position he was currently taking mid-air. The force took him at least 50 meters away from the group's attack. Just when he was about to land, he noticed multiple earth and ice spikes sprouting out of the ground. Rip! One of them tore through his pants, before putting a gash on his left thigh. With no other choice, he had to immediately go airborne again. With the wind element, he could stay airborne for a short period of time, but he was more versatile on the ground. Damn it, I forgot it was out of energy. If that guy didn't attack me, it would have still had some energy left, he complained inside. The reason he was able to take Alice's father's attack without so much as breaking a sweat was because of the blue vest. But the vest used up all the energy it had to block that attack, although the impact still sent him flying. When the battle first started, he completely forgot about Alice's father attacking him. Luckily, he didn't dare to take any attacks head-on, or else he might have been seriously wounded. Seeing Gray getting injured before going mid-air again gave the group fighting against him hope. As soon as things keep going like this, they would be able to kill him. They immediately employed the same tactics like the first time, using a pincer attack once again. Just like the first time, Gray couldn't afford to get stuck in that attack, so he had to use the wind element to change his direction once again. When he was about to set foot on the ground, the earth and water elementalists repeated what they did the first time. The cycle continued for 2 more minutes, with Gray slowly getting more cuts from the spikes. One of them had even nearly pierced him on the chest. If only I didn't have to hide my crap. Why the hell am I even hiding my lightning element in the first place? Gray almost facepalmed when he recalled that Gerald already knew about him. The reason he was initially hiding his lightning element was because Dillick was watching him, so he didn't want Gerald to be aware of his lightning element, since he had used 2 during the ceremony. It was only after he was caught in this situation did he realize Gerald already knew everything about him. Once he adds the lightning element to his arsenal, his speed would immediately go a notch higher. This will not only take the group fighting against him unaware, but it would also give him the opportunity he greatly needs right now. After moving through the air, he slowly mobilized his lightning and wind elements simultaneously, while also contracting his leg muscles. As soon as his foot touched the ground, bang, whoosh, he stomped heavily on the ground, before exploding out with a speed that was far superior to the one he was previously using. Before the earth and water elementalists could bring out the spikes, Gray was already nowhere to be seen. Bam! Ah! The sound of flesh hitting flesh rang out, followed by an agonizing scream. Gray soon appeared with a smirk on his face, and lightning dancing across his body. The wind elementalist was the one who screamed in pain. His arms were currently crossed in front of his body, and blood could be seen gushing out of a wound on it. TSK, you're faster than I thought, but I still wouldn't change the end result. Gray tutted while shaking his head. After escaping from the attack range of the water and earth elementalists, the first person he targeted was the wind elementalist. He originally wanted to punch him on the chest, but he reacted quickly and raised his hands to block the attack. Gray could tell the wind elementalist's hands were currently broken, so he wasn't really concerned about him anymore. A multi-elementalist. The water elementalist muttered bitterly. If Gray's third element were to be any other element, then he would feel they still had a chance. But since it was the lightning element, he almost didn't see any hopes for them. Gray was already fast when he had only the wind element. Now adding the lightning element was no different from making him untouchable. Buzz, buzz. Lightning danced around Gray, before he disappeared. 3 minutes later. Oh, the Smith family. Gray said while looking at the bleeding water elementalist. He was currently the only one left alive. Yes, if we don't return, they will send more people after you. You've already offended them by damaging the elemental beads of William and his sister, the water elementalist said. If you let me go, I'll tell them that we've killed you, but the others died in battle. What do you think? He continued. The Emperor is searching for me, and here I am perfectly healthy and walking freely. So, what do you think? Gray's lip curved upwards to form a playful smile. Thud. The water elementalist collapsed on the ground a few seconds later. The Smith family won't be able to find me, and I believe the next time we see after I get out of here, they wouldn't dare to offend me, Gray said before burning the bodies of the men. Chapter 327. Aish, that guy almost used my sealing array against me. Gray sighed before disabling the array. The forest he was previously resting in was already in ruins. Damn it. Those morons killed my horse. Do they know how much it cost me? He yelled in anger when he saw the bloodied horse. From how it looked, he guessed it must have been pierced through by multiple spikes when the water and earth elementalists were attacking him previously. Whoosh. You're truly something, Dillick said as he appeared behind Gray. Gray shrugged before opening up a hole on the ground and gently pushing the horse into it with his wind element. Such a shame you had to die because of me, he muttered after burying the horse. When will we be heading back? He turned his attention to Dillick. I could sneak you back to the city now, but I think waiting till it gets dark isn't a bad idea, Dillick replied. Gray nodded gently before heading towards one of the few trees that was still intact in the area. Since it's not even noon yet, I have a lot of time before it gets dark. I'll focus on comprehending the space element while I'm here, he thought. While he was leaving the city, he told Void to go and check out the Rice family compound again. Since Alice's father confirmed she was still in the compound, it meant she would be under the room Void tracked the light dot to. Void never saw the device anyway. They just assumed she left it since she wasn't there. Hey, have you been able to find her? He asked Void, who was currently in the Rice villa. Not yet, but I should be getting to the secret passage soon, I think, Void replied. Okay. Don't make contact with her when you find her. After I come back to the city, I'll write a letter to her explaining what happened, Gray ordered. Okay. After passing on what he wanted to Void, he immediately started cultivating. Dillick glanced at him, seeing that Gray immediately started cultivating as soon as he was free. He decided to let him be. Later that night, it's time, let's go. Dillick walked up to Gray and said. Gray's closed eyes snapped open. He stood up and held onto Dillick's left hand. Whoosh. Dillick flew into the sky, with Gray in tow. After getting to a proper height, he shot straight for Frost City. So this is the speed of an Overlord plane expert when they're flying, Grail thought to himself. He could barely see anything since they were moving too fast. When Brown took him to Red City the last time, he thought it was fast, but the Griffin is no match for Dillick's current speed. A minute later, he was able to see the outline of Frost City from a distance. But to his surprise, the city became bigger within the quarter of a second. Frost City, Len's Villa. I'm afraid you're going to have to stay here. Keep the communication device with you, so you can contact me if you need anything, Gerald said after opening the door to a small room. After Gray got to the villa, Gerald quietly brought him to a secret room in the villa. Each family naturally has something to hide, so would rather build these secret rooms. The only people who knew Gray was in the villa were Gerald and Dillick. To make it seem real, Gray told him to try and make sure only a few people knew of his presence in the city. It's okay. I don't plan on going out anyway. Gray stepped into the small room. The room was barely 10 meters wide, but it would do. Okay? Contact me when you need anything, Gerald replied before turning around and leaving Gray alone. After watching Gerald leave, Gray walked out of the room. He wouldn't only be researching on the communication device, but he would also be trying to comprehend the space element. It would be dangerous if someone were to walk in accidentally when he comprehends the element and sees him using it. Therefore, he decided to make a detecting array on stairs that leads to the room. Once anyone walks through it, then he would be instantly alerted about it. Creak, slam. He closed the wooden door after he was done with the array. Come on out. How did it go? He looked at the empty bed on the room. Void suddenly appeared on the bed after hearing Gray's question. I found her, and she's alright, Void replied lazily. Oh, that's good. I'll start writing a letter for you to take to her now. Gray brought out ink and brush, and immediately started writing a letter to Alice. He told her the reason why the Emperor was searching for them, as well as what happened during the time they left him in the academy. Not only that, but he also told her about Reynolds, as well as his encounter with her father. Of course, he left out the part where her father threatened him. He also told her not to let him know he contacted her, since he refused to take him to see her. Since I've confirmed Alice is okay, I need to get to work on the communication device. Now I'll need to head back to where Reynolds is located, so I can give him the device when I've made it. Gray thought out loud after Void left with the letter for Alice. Guess it's time to get to work. I need to make this as soon as possible. Luckily, I took enough wood from that guy. With that, Gray brought out all the papers he had previously drawn the arrays on. He initially didn't think he would get to keep the device with him for this long. After preparing everything, he immediately started working on the arrays. Once he gets the catch of it, he would implement it on a wooden item. He planned to add the communication array to the same wooden disc he was using to locate the others. Chapter 328. 2 days later. Someone's coming. Gray, who was sitting before multiple papers which had different array lines on them, looked in the direction of the door. With a wave of his hand, he kept all the papers in his storage ring. Knock, knock. He soon heard knocking on the door. Creak. The wooden door made a creaking sound as it was opened. Master Gerald asked if you would like to see Donald. Dillick asked after walking in. Gray initially wanted to complain about how he entered the room without waiting for his response, but he decided to let it go when he heard what he said. Alice's father. How did he know I was here? Gray asked. He had been in contact with Alice during these past 2 days, and according to her, she didn't tell her father, nor anyone of their contact. He only came to ask if we knew of your whereabouts. Master Gerald told me to come ask you if you'd like to see him. Now answer yes or no, Dillick said. Gray thought about it for a bit before nodding. Since Donald came looking for him, maybe it was because he had decided to let him see Alice. Although it wasn't really all that important now, he didn't mind seeing her. Here, Dillick threw a brown robe to him. Gray didn't ask any questions and wore the robe. They left the secret room and headed for Gerald's office. They encountered Gerald's daughter, the young lady who didn't like Gray, but since she didn't see his face, she didn't even bother them. After a few twists and turns, they got to the office. Dillick opened the door and the duo stepped in. I knew you'd decide to meet him, Gerald said after Gray stepped in. Donald turned around only to see Gray removing the part of the robe that covered his face. I thought he left, he asked, a little taken aback. No, I only pretended to. Like I said, I'm not leaving until I see her, Gray replied calmly. It's good that you're here. First of all, I'd like to apologize for my actions the last time we saw each other, but my decision is the same. I will not allow you to see her, Donald said. Then why are you searching for me? Gray asked, confused. I wanted to thank you for what you did when you spoke to Sasha after you left. I never thought you'd be that thoughtful for someone your age. Even after I offended you, you didn't want Sasha to look at me in disappointment just because of your friend. That, and for your thoughtfulness, I can allow you to write a letter to her, but that's it, Donald said after a while. Gray almost snapped when he heard this. Write a letter your head. I've been writing to her for the past 2 days. Why would I need you to help me write a letter to her? He complained inside. Donald noticed the change in his expression, but he pretended like he saw nothing. I cannot allow you to see her. Doing that will only endanger her. I hope you understand, he said, trying to convince Gray. Fine, fine. Here, I already wrote a letter. You can hand this to her. Gray fished out a letter from his robe before handing it over to him. Thank you. I'll be going now. I never saw you. Donald took the letter and left. HMPH. Such strictness. He even told me he never saw me like we're committing a huge crime. Gray snorted after Donald left. Well, technically, you're a criminal in the eyes of the Emperor and his people. Otherwise, you wouldn't be hiding here. Gerald chuckled. I'm going back to cultivate, Gray said before turning back to the room. He didn't expect Alice's father would be this stubborn. Even after he apologized to him, he still refused to allow him see Alice. This will change after he comprehends the space element though, so he wasn't too bothered. After going back to his room, he focused mainly on the device. Whenever he was trapped in a difficult situation, he would start comprehending the space element to get his mind off arrays. It worked wonders, as within 2 weeks, he was able to make a breakthrough in making the device. He managed to make one separately. Now, all he had to do is to add it to the already existing arrays on the disk. This was what he found challenging, since it would be difficult connecting them. Should I just make one like this and forget about connecting them? He asked himself. This seemed to be the more rational decision since it would save time, but he wanted to make an improvement to the communication device. This will do for now. I'll improve it later. What's important now is that we can speak to each other. But I don't know the limit of the distance. I'll have to ask old man Gerald, he muttered. Distance was going to be a very important factor of this device. If he doesn't know the limit of it, then it would be a wasted effort. If he could find out the distance, then he could work on improving it. He already knew it could contact someone who's in Red City. That was thousands of miles away from here. But he didn't know exactly where Klaus currently was, so he couldn't guess the distance. If the distance on the device turns out to be too short, then they would not be able to contact each other. After he leaves Frost City, he quickly contacted Gerald, and to his surprise, he didn't need to improve it, since it could travel across 2 empires. That was a massive distance. How did they do it? Impressive. He couldn't help but praise after finding out. With that, he started working on 3 others. He wants to finish it before focusing his full attention on the space element. 1 week later, he was done with the devices. Void, take this to Alice. Let's test it out. He handed one of the devices to Void. Okay. Chapter 329. Buzz. The wooden device in Gray's hand vibrated, drawing his attention. He looked at it before sending his spiritual sense into the device. Gray, can you hear me? A voice rang out in Gray's head as soon as he sent his spiritual sense inside. It was a voice he was all too familiar with. He shook his head with a smile before replying, yes, I can hear you. You don't have to call my name twice, you know. Ah, it works. How wonderful. But seriously, how does this thing work anyway? Alice's excited voice rang out in his head once again. It's very simple actually. The arrays that are drawn in the device connect with the spiritual energy of the world, Gray explained. Once a person uses their spiritual sense to activate it, they could speak through it, and it would travel as some sort of vibration. It would manifest into the voice of the person after reaching the other device. One could speak out loud on it, or with a thought. Wow, amazing. You really outdid yourself this time, Gray, Alice praised after Gray's explanation. Well, like I originally told you in my letters, others had already made it. I just copied their works. Although there are a few changes, it's not that much different. Gray scratched his head awkwardly. Hearing Alice's voice again felt wonderful. If only he could see her and the others. Oh, okay. But you still did good. I'm praising you. So accept it, Alice yelled, almost making Gray drop the device from fright. Fine, TSK. You don't have to be so aggressive about it, Gray complained. Now that you've made the device, I guess you'll be leaving soon, Alice asked in a low voice. Yeah, I need to take this to Reynolds and then Klaus. But before leaving, I'll come to see you, Gray answered. You know, I really miss you guys. Staying here is so boring. There's no one to beat around here, Alice said. When Gray heard the first part of her statement, he felt sentimental, thinking how they had to hide. But on hearing the other part of the statement, he almost didn't want to go visit her after comprehending the space element. Alice, you're a lady. You shouldn't be beating people up so much, Gray said with his mouth twitching. What? Who says a lady shouldn't beat people up? Alice yelled, making the device shake repeatedly. I repeat that and I'll break your legs, Alice threatened. Gray was scared shitless when he heard this. They hadn't seen for so long that he completely forgot how she acts. Luckily we're not together, he thought gratefully. They continued speaking for almost 30 minutes before Gray decided to stop their chat. From how enthusiastic Alice was, he could tell she must have been very bored in that place. Don't worry, all this will end soon. Then we will travel the continent freely, Gray said. I really hope so. Also, try to give Reynolds and Klaus theirs. It has been so long I spoke with them, Alice said in a low voice. Yeah, but you do know you can talk to me anytime even if I'm busy, right? Gray asked with a chuckle. Really? Yeah, all you have to do is leave a message. Even if I don't reply instantly, I'll hear it and reply later. Gray smiled. Okay. Bye, I really need to get to work now. Gray waved even though Alice wasn't there. Bye, I'll talk to you whenever I'm bored. Gray smiled before keeping the device in his storage ring. Aish, I miss the old days. He sighed. Talking to Alice made him remember their time at the academy and the trial land. Stupid Emperor. It's not like I have any interest in challenging him. Why the hell is he doing this to me? And according to Old Man Gerald, it's not just him, but the other empires are also after me. Damn it. I'll need to grow stronger faster, or else I'll be killed by these stupid people. Gray clenched his fist as determination flashed across his eyes. The quickest way for him to improve his strength is if he comprehends another element. Once he comprehends the space element, he would be left with one more known element, the light element. After comprehending the space element, his cultivation speed will receive a significant boost. Not just that, but his stage will also see an increase. Although he might not instantly break through to the 7th stage of the origin plane, he wouldn't be far from it after he increases the elemental grade of the space element. Gray waited for Void to return, and immediately started working with him on comprehending the space element. He wanted to use the same way he used with the darkness element. He would get Void to use the space element while studying it. Although he knew this wasn't going to be easy since he had tried it multiple times over the months, he didn't plan on giving up. Furthermore, he could sense that he wasn't far from comprehending it. The feeling was almost like when he comprehended the darkness element, only it wasn't as intense as it was at that time. The day went by with Gray spending most of his attention on the space element. Unfortunately, he was unable to fully focus on it, since Alice would reach out to him every 2 hours. The days started slowly going by as he tried to comprehend the space element. Whenever he was not working on the space element, he would either be talking to Alice, or he would be cultivating to improve his elemental essence. He didn't neglect his daily physical training, only there was only so much he could do trapped in such a small place. But he focused on his training. A month went by in this manner, and Alice had been in a more cheerful state, since she could talk to Gray every day. Gray was able to convince her to give him some time, so they made a scheduled time they would talk every day. Chapter 330. It's been a month already. Are you confident in being able to comprehend it? Alice asked. Of course. I don't do things I'm not confident in. Gray replied with confidence. I know you're still here because you want to see me, Alice said. After a while, she added, you know you can leave, right? Yeah, I know. Gray replied with a wry smile. Comprehending the space element has proved harder than he expected. He had told Alice he would be able to come to see her when he comprehends the space element. But even though he could feel he was close to it, he hasn't been able to yet. Congratulations on breaking through to the 4th stage. Gray changed the topic. Yeah, but I'm still no way near you. You're already in the 6th stage, and that was over a month ago, Alice replied. I have 6 elements with the lowest grade being purple grade. You shouldn't compare my speed with yours. Gray encouraged her. Yeah, I'm glad I've been able to talk to you lately. If only the others were around, Alice replied sadly. Yeah, Reynolds would be the first I'll give this to, so you'll be able to talk to him soon. Klaus seems to be moving further away from me, so it would take a while to get to him. Gray said, Hey, I'd like to see you, but I think it's best for you to leave. I know you also want to go find your parents, Alice said softly. Yeah, I'll stay for 2 more weeks. If I'm unable to comprehend it, then I'll head over to give Reynolds the device before heading over to give Klaus the other. Gray nodded. He wasn't going to waste all his time on the space element. If he couldn't comprehend it now, he would be able to comprehend it later. There was no use bothering himself over it. I feel like I'm missing something. If I can get that, then I would be able to comprehend it. He added. Okay, good luck. Alice cheered him on. Thank you. I'm also working on something else actually, and I might just be able to complete it within the next 2 weeks. Gray said with a proud smile. Oh, what's that? Alice asked curiously. It's like a communication device. But unlike this current one, we will be able to see each other. Gray replied. How do you even think of all these? Is something like that even possible? Alice almost couldn't believe what she was hearing. Actually, it shouldn't be too hard, I think. I've been doing some hypothesis for some time now, and I feel it's quite plausible. Gray replied. You have a crazy mind, always coming up with weird ideas. Alice laughed as she replied. I also planned on making some type of teleportation array, just like what we used in going into the trial land. I feel if I'm able to integrate the space element into an array, it should work. Gray continued telling her of his other plans. You really need to get out of that room. The longer you stay there, the crazier you'll become. Alice chuckled. She knew what Gray said about the teleportation array was right, but she felt he had been thinking too much, which isn't necessarily good. Come on, think about it. Being able to move from one city to another in an instant would be revolutionary. I think why no one has had this idea was because they didn't understand how the array on the trial land works. But after coming in contact with Void and knowing of the space element, I know why, Gray explained. The array in the trial land? Alice asked thoughtfully. Yeah, if my conjecture is right, the space element was integrated into it, making us travel through space to another place. Gray replied. Space element. I can't really say much about it, since I know little about arrays and the space element. Alice said. Yeah. Do you remember the feeling of being sucked into? Gray suddenly paused. Gray, are you there? Alice asked when Gray suddenly went quiet. Haha, that's it. All I need to do is remember that feeling. Gray laughed out excitedly. Are you all right? Alice asked worriedly. Yes, thank you, Gray said happily. For what? Asked a confused Alice. For helping me find the missing piece, Gray replied. You're welcome. Alice replied with a little uncertainty. I have to go now. I'll talk to you later, Gray said and tossed the device to the bed. Okay? Goodbye, Alice said. Unfortunately, Gray wouldn't be able to hear her, nor reply to her. Gray was currently grinning from ear to ear. All I need to do is remember that feeling. Once I do it, it'll all click, he thought excitedly. Who knew talking with someone would actually lead him to finding out what was missing? Although he was the one who spoke about it. If he never had this conversation with Alice, there was no way he would have been struck with this idea. He had been thinking about this for a while now, but he never thought about it this way. He quickly calmed his excited mind. Now, he had to clear his head from all distractions, so he could go back to the time when they were being pulled into the trial land. That was a feeling he had felt multiple times. All of them were in the trial land. If he could properly recall the feeling, then he would be able to comprehend it. He had been studying the space element for a while now, with Void's help, but it was different from the darkness element where all he had to do was a couple experiments. He had tried it with the space element, but he had been unable to do it. After calming his mind, he tried to recall how he felt during all the times, while he was being transported by the space element in the trial land. If he's able to get the feeling, then he would be able to unlock the space element. This time, I'll definitely get it. Chapter 331. 2 hours later. Just a little further. I can already feel it. Gray opened his eyes, which were starting to turn red. When he initially got the idea, he thought it would make him easily comprehend the space element. But it was just like the first time. It wasn't as easy as he expected. I can make it. I just need to dig deeper, he encouraged himself. Void, who was beside him, couldn't help but stare at him when he saw his expression. Even when Gray didn't sleep for 2 weeks, he didn't look this haggard. Don't force yourself, he said to him. I know, it's just that. I can already feel it's close to my fingertips. If I stretch just a little further, I'll grab it. I'm usually the one who always says not to stress yourself too much over something, but when it's this close, you have to push yourself further. No matter what, Gray replied with determination in his eyes. Also, I feel if I miss this chance, it might take longer before I comprehend it. That's not something I want, he added before closing his eyes once more. He had tried to recall the feeling of being sucked by that mysterious force, but it still hasn't been enough to trigger it. Now, he plans to go deeper, and he knows just the place to think about. When he was being chased by frogs and lizards after acquiring the multi-elemental blade, he entered a place where he traveled through space for a while. That was the perfect place for him to recall. If he's able to recall the feeling of being in that place, then maybe he might just be able to grab onto the space element. That seems to be on the verge of slipping away from his finger. 3 more hours. Damn it. Bang. Gray punched the wall furiously, causing a huge hole to appear on it. I can't get it. I can't get it. It's been too long, he said while holding onto his head in annoyance. He could slowly sense the feeling of comprehending the space element moving away from him. No, I can't allow this. I won't allow it, he thought with blazing eyes. As he looked around for a solution to his dilemma, his eyes lit up as he saw Void. How big is the space tunnel you can create? He asked hurriedly. Not that big, at most 3 to 4 times my size, Void replied. But what of those shiny things you steal? Gray couldn't help but ask. They're long, not wide. If you notice, most of the items I take, not steal, are long, Void corrected him. Fine, open a space tunnel, Gray said through gritted teeth. What do you want to do? Void asked worriedly. There's no way I can go through it, since I'm more than 4 times wider than you. I just want to place my hand inside to feel how it's like there, Gray replied. That's a bit too dangerous. A lot of things could go wrong with it. First of all, if you've noticed, I don't open space tunnels in a single position. I move from one location to another. The reason for this is because sometimes there are things that might disrupt the stability of a space tunnel when it's opened in a particular spot for too long. Secondly, I'm not adept enough to properly control it. After reaching rank 5, then I'll have an even bigger control. By then, I wouldn't have any problems with taking you along, Void explained. Don't worry, I'll make it quick, Gray said. Fine, I'll hold it for as long as I can. Try not to leave your hand in there for too long. If the tunnel closes with part of your hand still inside, it's gone, Void warned after agreeing. He could see how desperate Gray was for this, so he couldn't say no. Their conversation didn't take more than 5 seconds, since communicating with their minds was faster than when speaking out. I can still sense the feeling, but just barely. If this works, then I'll be able to get the space element, Gray thought while clenching his fists. Open it, he said to Void. Void nodded before stretching out his small paw. A black hole opened around 12 inches wide. Gray took in a deep breath before placing his left hand inside the hole. As soon as his hand touched the hole, it effortlessly slipped into it. This feeling, it's almost like there's nothing there, he thought. With his eyes closed, he tried to engross himself in the feeling he was getting from his left hand. He even moved all his spiritual sense into the hand to get the best feeling of it. After sending his spiritual sense towards his hands for a clearer understanding, he completely shut out the outside world. In this state, he had zero knowledge of what was going on in the outside world. Even communicating with Void would be difficult, but not impossible. But because he wanted to employ his full focus on the space element, he decided to shut him out as well. It would be annoying if he were close to it, and Void suddenly spoke to him, distracting him. 2 minutes later, Gray, I can't hold on much longer, Void said shakily. Gray, he called out again, only to be met by deaf ears. Crap, he had shut out everything. Does he really think he would be able to comprehend it before I wear out? Damn it. He's purposely putting me under pressure, Void complained before forcing himself to hold on much longer. He could frequently travel with it, since the difficulty of going from one location to another was inferior to when keeping a single space tunnel active. If he could enforce it with a raise just like the one to the trial land, then he wouldn't be bothered. Now, it was all up to luck, and how long Void could last. If he could last long enough before Gray comprehends the space element, then they win. If he couldn't, then Gray would become a mindless person, since his spiritual sense would be lost in the space tunnel along with his hand. Chapter 332. While Void was complaining, Gray was trying his best to comprehend the space element. He didn't get much from just sending only his hand into the space tunnel, but adding his spiritual sense made up for it. But doing this increased the danger, and he is fully aware of it. If he doesn't pull out his hand before the space tunnel collapses, then he would lose his mind, literally. Losing the part of the body where the spiritual sense lies would render one mindless. The spiritual sense of each elementalist contains the consciousness of the elementalist. If, for example, an elementalist places their spiritual sense in a space tunnel just like this one and the tunnel collapses, then there's no way of sending it back to the body. Without the consciousness in the body, one's mind would revert back to when they were just born, only this time, they wouldn't grow mentally. Gray decided to take the risk because he knew rewards only come with risks. It was just his time in the trial land. Without taking the risks he took, he wouldn't be where he is right now. Going to the trial land was a risk on its own as well. The other reason he decided to do this was also due to the risk factor as well. Once he's conscious of the fact that he might die if he doesn't comprehend the space element quickly, he feels he might be able to get it. It has been proven that human potential is far more active when it comes to life and death scenarios. Although, he is well aware that not all scenarios end well. I can feel the space element slowly filling my mind. The longer I stay here, the clearer it becomes, Gray thought while lost in a daze. The only thing in his mind right now was the space element. It got to the extent that he even forgot the danger he was currently in, as he embraced the feeling he was getting from the space element. While Gray was lost in comprehending the space element, Void, on the other hand, was having a difficult time hanging on. Shit. He better prepare something good for me after this, or else we're done. Void complained after 2 more minutes went by. If not for the fact that he knew Gray's life would be in danger, he would have already stopped this by now. He was presently only hanging on with sheer willpower. Just when he thought things were bad, things turned worse when he looked at Gray. "Fuck me," he yelled, staggering with frightened eyes. Around Gray, spatial distortions could be seen. This would have been good since it meant Gray was starting to have good contact with the space element. But in their current state, it wasn't just bad, it was the worst possible thing that could happen. These spatial distortions would quickly disrupt the flow of space in the room, easily shattering the spatial tunnel Void currently has set up. If the tunnel were to collapse, Void might still be able to find the coordinates and retrieve Gray's hand, thereby reuniting him with his spiritual sense which is in the hand. But if the spatial tunnel shatters, it would destroy everything in it. Shit. I might die as well if this continues any further. Void almost felt like crying. The spatial distortions around Gray were starting to grow bigger and covering a wider range. Void hastily set up another spatial tunnel to counter the distortions that were appearing close to the tunnel Gray's hand was in. Damn it, he complained as he stared at Gray with gritted teeth. His vision was already starting to get blurry from overexertion, but he was forcing himself to stay awake. If he fails to hold on, then Gray would most likely die. What is currently stopping the spatial distortions right now from destroying Gray's body is because he currently has some connection with the space element. If it were to be someone else, then the person would already be dead. If Void falls asleep and the spatial tunnel closes, then the link between Gray and the space element would be broken. This will allow the distortions to destroy him. 1 more minute went by, and Void could barely see what was around him. His eyes were already drowsy, and standing was already starting to become difficult. I have to hang on just a longer, he pushed himself. His consciousness was already starting to fade, but he couldn't give up on Gray. He didn't dare to. As it stands, he had already pushed himself far beyond his limits. Right now, he could even say he was at his limit's limit. He didn't even know if that made sense, but that was how he was currently feeling. Void was not only trying to keep himself awake, but he also has to focus on stopping the distortions that were headed towards the spatial tunnel as well as the ones heading his way. Void could barely hang on, while Gray was getting a better feeling of the space element as his consciousness stayed in the tunnel a little longer. He could feel the space element was in his grasp. All he had to do is pull, and it would be his. But the space element was being more stubborn than he expected. I will comprehend you this time, no matter what, Gray thought while pushing his spiritual sense further into the spatial tunnel, away from the protection of his hand. When the spiritual sense left his hand, it was immediately hit by a wave of unknown energy, almost destroying it. Haha, yes, a little more, he laughed as he pushed it deeper into the tunnel. The energy wave struck his spiritual sense once again, harder, pushing it further back. After being hit again by the energy wave, Gray's starting bleeding from his mouth and nose on his physical body. His spiritual sense was getting damaged from the attacks from the energy wave, but he refused to give up. I will move further, no matter what it takes. I will hold on longer, even if it kills me, Gray and Void said at the same time. Chapter 333. Inside the spatial tunnel. Gray's spiritual sense has been hit over and over again, but he keeps on pushing further. It was already starting to grow faint. Just a little more, a little further. He kept telling himself the same thing after being assaulted by the energy wave. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. It went on and on, he couldn't even keep count. His physical body was already starting to bleed from his eyes and ears as well. Void was shaking violently. The spatial distortions around them were not just increasing, but they were also growing stronger. Void was already on his last legs. Keeping the spatial tunnel for this long was already starting to have an effect on his core, a bad one, but he couldn't bring himself to stop it. It has been only 5 minutes. But Void felt like it has been years. These 5 minutes currently felt longer than the almost 1 year he had been living. I can't go on anymore, he thought shakingly. His thoughts were currently a mess. He couldn't even see what was going on around him. His senses were the only thing telling him about what was happening, and that too was starting to fade. Please, stop, he called out to Gray unconsciously. He was literally on the verge of losing it. But Gray's consciousness was still inside the spatial tunnel. A minute more went by, and his senses started losing the last bit of what was left. I'm sorry, even if I want to hold on, I can't, Void said to Gray weakly, his voice growing fainter towards the end of his statement. Thud. Void collapsed on the ground. As soon as he collapsed, the spatial tunnel Gray's hand was inside started flickering. This was the last Void could do. Even before going out, he still instilled his will on the spatial tunnel to last a little longer. In the spatial tunnel, Gray's spiritual sense was only left with a small faint flickering light. It was so small that it was barely visible. Further. I need to go further. This was the only statement his mind was resonating to himself. The spatial tunnel suddenly shook. After shaking, the energy wave which was heading towards Gray's faint, flickering spiritual sense multiplied in strength by at least 5 times. As it was charging at Gray's spiritual sense, the spatial tunnel was shaking violently. Boom. The energy wave hit Gray's spiritual energy fiercely, but this time the small faint spiritual sense wasn't pushed back. Instead, it continued advancing. Rumble. The spatial tunnel continued shaking, but the spiritual sense kept moving forward. Ahead of the spiritual sense, a light could be seen. I just need to go further, just a little bit more, Gray repeated as he continued moving forward. His spiritual sense continued moving closer to the light, but the tremors in the spatial tunnel increased. Spatial distortions could be seen on some parts of the tunnel. No, I just need a little more, Gray complained when he noticed the spatial tunnel was slowly starting to fall apart. If he turned around now, there's at least a 70% chance that he would be able to get back to his hand and then exit the place, since he would be able to move faster when going back. No, not after all I've done. And Void, how's he doing? He was barely conscious, but he could tell the only reason the spatial tunnel was falling apart was that Void must have most likely lost consciousness. With the addition of the spatial distortions, the energy wave's power increased once again by 2 folds. I refuse to let our hard work go in vain, Gray yelled and continued pushing forward. What he was currently doing was like a child going against the current of a huge waterfall. The current was pushing him, but he refused to back down. The spatial tunnel continued falling apart as more spatial distortions appeared in the tunnel. Len's villa. Gerald was sitting in his office casually, speaking with 3 people. The roads are getting increasingly dangerous for the merchants, and the mercenaries seem to be charging higher now for escorting the caravans, the lady in the group reported. I'll send someone to go check out the route, if possible. Gerald suddenly stopped talking and looked in the direction of the secret room Gray was staying in. What's the feeling? He asked himself before standing up. Wait here, I'll be back shortly, he said before walking out of the office. After stepping out of his office, he saw Dillick outside with a worried expression. You also sensed it? He asked. Dillick nodded with a serious expression. What could he be doing? Even I feel threatened by what I'm currently sensing, Gerald said while walking out of the building his office was in, heading to where Gray was located. Given his cultivation stage, there is only one thing that could threaten him, and that was a Sage Plane Elementalist. He didn't think the Emperor would send a Sage Plane expert after Gray, but he couldn't think of anything that Gray could do that would be able to threaten him. Sigh, this kid is trouble. The sooner he leaves, the safer I will feel. I dreamt he died while he was here, and Chris chased me all over the continent before killing me. Gerald trembled when he recalled the dream. He knew how unreasonable Chris could be. Even if he showed him proof that he tried keeping his students safe, he would still blame him. Dillick sent a glance Gerald's way. He could tell he was traumatized by the thought of making Chris angry. He had heard of Chris from Gerald, but he had never seen him before. "Don't worry, Master Gerald. I don't think anything will happen to the boy," he consoled him. This was the best he could do right now. They got to the place that led to the secret room within a minute, before pushing the mechanism that hid the door that led to the room. Chapter 334. Rumble. The secret passage opened before the duo disappeared inside. It stopped. Gerald paused and looked in Dillick's direction, while they were still in the stairway leading to the room. "I can't sense him," Dillick said. Gerald's pupils shrunk when he heard this, and he quickly tried to sense if Gray was in the room, but his expression worsened. He couldn't find anyone in the room with his spiritual senses. There was no way Gray could hide his aura from someone like him. This meant only two things: either Gray was dead, or he was not in the room. But they sensed him while they were rushing here. Even after they opened the passage, they still felt him in the room. So there's no way he left the room. That leaves them with only one possibility. Gray was dead. Impossible, Gerald muttered before sprinting towards the door. He felt his life was attached to Gray's life while Gray was here. If Gray died under his custody, then he was most likely a goner. Slam. He didn't bother to knock. With a wave of his hand, the door shattered immediately. "What?" Gerald and Dillick exclaimed simultaneously when they looked inside the room. Impossible. Dillick was the one to mutter to himself this time. In the center of the room, Gray could be seen sitting in a crossed-leg position, wearing a silver shirt and blue pants. The room was perfectly arranged as it had always been whenever they came to see him. Gray opened his eyes to look at the duo who just shattered the door. When the duo looked into his eyes, it was like it was sucking them into the boundless space. This feeling stunned the two Overlord plane experts. This was something they have never felt before. "You know you could just knock, right?" Gray asked while holding a piece of the shattered wood that shot his way when Gerald destroyed the door. Gerald and Dillick looked at each other. It was as if they were staring at a ghost. Even after coming into the room, they still can't sense Gray's aura or presence. "Phew, thank the stars you're all right." Gerald breathed out a sigh of relief. He didn't even want to ask what Gray was doing in the room. As long as Gray was alive and all right, nothing else mattered. Dillick looked at Gray suspiciously. On seeing that Gerald refused to ask him what he was doing, he also refrained from asking as well. Gerald stayed for a few more minutes, asking about Gray's well-being. Gray didn't know if Gerald genuinely cared about him, or was just scared of his teacher. It was only when Gerald wanted to leave did he get his answer. "So when will you be leaving?" Gerald turned around to ask just as he was about to leave. "Soon, in a day or two," Gray replied calmly. "Okay." Gerald nodded before turning around, just as he was about to leave. Can I have a moment alone with you?" Gray suddenly called out. Gerald paused, looked at him, before nodding to Dillick. Dillick understood what he meant and immediately left the room, leaving the duo alone. After confirming Dillick was gone, Gray pulled out Void from his shirt. What's that?" Gerald asked unconsciously, taking a step forward. "A cat, how strange. Can you find out if he's fine?" "He's alive, but he isn't responding to anything," Gray said in a low voice while gently handing Void over to Gerald. Gerald took Void from him, and noticed Gray's hands were shaking after he passed Void to him. So this is the cat they spoke about, he thought while looking at Void. He naturally knew about Void after doing his research on Void. When they told him about it, he felt overwhelmed by it. For a cat to be able to block the attack of a peak Origin Plane elementalists, while being in the early stages of the Origin Plane, was unbelievable. He always found it strange that he hadn't seen Void with Gray, since Gray came to him, making him a little skeptical. "What happened to it?" Gerald asked Gray. "Him, not it. His name's Void and he's not something you can address, is it?" Gray snapped when he heard Gerald addressing Void like he was an object. "I'm sorry, what happened to him?" Gerald was a little taken aback by Gray's sudden outburst, but on seeing his expression, he could tell he wasn't alright. "He overexerted himself while helping me." Can you help him?" Gray said, guilt very evident in his words. Wait, let me check his condition, Gerald said. A few minutes later, Gerald opened his eyes, looking at Gray. What exactly did he do? He asked, but after being met without any reply, he added, quote, "Sigh, his physical condition is fine, but his consciousness is damaged. Whatever he was helping you with, he literally damaged himself just to make sure you did whatever you wanted." Gray clenched his fist when he heard Gerald's analysis. He didn't expect it to be this bad. Is there a way to help him? He asked with a shaky voice. To be honest, it's going to be difficult. What you'll need is a natural treasure that has the effect of improving spiritual senses. That should be able to help mend his damaged consciousness, Gerald replied. Gray felt a little better on hearing there's a way to help Void. This was all he wanted to find out about, so hearing it made him grateful. These treasures are very rare, and I haven't heard of anyone finding one in years, Gerald said to Gray, quickly waking him back to reality. I'll find it, Gray said confidently. He didn't care where the treasure was as long as it would heal Void. He'll find it. Gerald shook his head wryly. A lot of people say that. It's only after they start the journey do they find out that it's not as easy as it sounds. I'm not like them. I'll find it, no matter where it is. Gray eyes gleamed with determination. Fine, then I'll give you a heads up. The only place you can find it is in the magical beast forest. That's the only place it has ever been reported to be seen, Gerald said after seeing how determined he looked. Chapter 335. Okay, thank you. Gray bowed, showing his gratitude. No problem. Just another reminder, there's also a possibility that he might heal without it. But the chances of that are very slim, Gerald added before walking out. After Gerald left the room, Gray created a wall to block the space where the door used to be. I didn't expect it would take me that long, he thought, feeling remorseful. He looked at Void with a sad smile. He had finally comprehended the space element, but at what cost? Sigh, I was too rash. I should have come out when I noticed how difficult it was. Maybe he would have been fine if I came out sooner, he muttered while caressing Void's fur. While he was inside, he knew the longer he stayed in the tunnel, the harder it was for Void to keep it up. But he couldn't help it. The space element was just at his fingertips. He couldn't lose it. He didn't want to lose it. Will the tonic be able to help him? I recalled he said it could heal someone that was on death's door. He suddenly recalled about the healing tonic he got from the blooming vipers. Without wasting any time, he quickly took out one of the bottles from his spatial ring, before feeding it to Void. He waited patiently as the tonic went through Void's mouth into his body. After 5 minutes, there were no reactions from Void. From the looks of it, it seems like it only works on the physical body, and not the consciousness. The consciousness of any creature is a very complex entity. Although he felt the chances of the tonic helping were slim, he did feel a little hopeful when he recalled how it helped him the last time. I need to start moving. The sooner I head to the magical beast forest, the better, he muttered before standing up. With Void injured, he didn't have the time to sit around and mope. The best thing to do now is to find a way to heal him. His current plan remains like before, only this time, he was in a hurry. Gray picked up the robe from the side of the bed before putting it on. He came out of the secret room and headed straight to Gerald's office. On getting there, Gerald was still discussing with the people who came. But when he noticed Gray's presence outside, he excused himself from the office. Thank you for your help throughout the time I was here. I'll be leaving now. Gray bowed to him as soon as he saw him. You're leaving? Gerald asked to confirm. Yes, I need to head to the magical beast forest as soon as possible. Gray didn't hide the motive of him leaving. Going there alone is dangerous, but it would help you advance quicker. Gerald didn't try to stop him. Gray threw the communication device he got from him back before turning around. Here, you should keep it. If you're in any location where there's a merchant organization, I might be able to help. Gerald gave the device back to him. Thank you. Gray took it and started walking away again. He would go visit Alice, before heading to give Reynolds one of the communication devices. Klaus would be the last of them to get the device, but before leaving, he wanted to make an array close to Frost City. According to the disc, if he wanted to meet Klaus after giving Reynolds the device, then he would need to pass through Frost City again. Either that or he had to go around, and he didn't have that time. Gray left the Lenz villa and hurried over to where the Rice family villa was located. He had gotten the information of how to sneak into the secret room from Void, so he wasn't too bothered. After getting to the Rice villa's wall, His body flashed twice before he disappeared. The next moment, he appeared on the other side of the wall, silently. So, this is the feeling. Gray stared at his hand. This was his first time moving through a space tunnel he created. Not just that, it was completely different from the array they used. The time frame in moving from one location to another was faster. This could be attributed to the fact that where he was going was closer. He looked around, there, and there. Void had studied the movements and locations of each guard, which he later told Gray. Gray easily moved through the villa like it was his backyard, thanks to Void's detailed explanation. 10 minutes later, in a secret room inside the Rice villa, Alice could be seen lying on the bed leisurely with her legs hanging out of the end of the bed. She was wearing a casual knee-length shirt with white pair of pants. Will he be done by now? She said with her finger on her lips. Buzz. She stood up and attacked the left side of the room with a lightning bolt. Is this how you welcome a friend? Gray asked after opening a space tunnel to dismiss the lightning strike. I knew it was you. I just wanted to see how fast your reaction was. Alice giggled while looking at Gray. You've comprehended it? Alice asked with a shocked expression. Yeah, Gray said with a sad expression. What's with that face? You should be celebrating. Alice scolded with her hands on her hips. I really want to, Gray said with a wry smile. But you see, I can't. He brought out Void from his storage ring where he was keeping him, showing him to Alice. Gasps. What happened? Alice asked with a gasp as she took Void from him. Gray went on to tell Alice about what happened, and why Void was hurt. Why didn't you exit it sooner? He told you he couldn't keep it up for long. Alice scolded him when she heard the story. I could feel it. Heh, I guess I was greedy, Gray said with a self-deprecating laugh. You sigh, what are you going to do now? Alice wanted to scold him, but seeing his guilty expression, she couldn't. I'll be heading to the magical beast forest. I only wanted to see you before I leave. Gray told her his plan. Okay, Alice nodded. Oh, I'll need essence stones. A lot of them, Gray said. There's some in my father's room. Alice replied instantly. She didn't even ask him what he wanted to use them for. Since Gray said he needed it, then it's okay. Is it okay taking them? Gray asked. Of course, my dad has no use for them. Alice waved it off. Gray looked at her suspiciously, but since he needed it, he couldn't say no. Besides, he had a small grudge against him when he came here the last time. Even though he had apologized, it wasn't that bad to steal a thing or two from him. What do you need them for? Alice asked after telling him where the location of the essence stones was. I want to make a teleportation array like the one we used in entering the trial land. Gray explained to her. He would create the array close by, then connect it with the one he was going to make wherever Reynolds was located. That way, he could easily travel here from that side without bothering about the time he would need. Oh, how convenient. Alice exclaimed in awe. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't stay long. I'll visit when I come back, Gray said with a smile. Okay, Alice nodded. Gray hugged her before vanishing from the room. He followed Alice's directions and quickly made his way into her father's room. The essence stones were kept under his bed, but it wasn't too difficult for him to collect them. After keeping them, he snuck out of the villa. Crap, the consumption is outrageous. He almost screamed out after leaving the villa. Now he understood why Void didn't use it all the time. He didn't use the space element for too long, but he was already feeling tired from it. After experiencing this, he felt even more guilt when he recalled how he made Void open the tunnel for a long time. He slowly headed towards the exit of the city. There was a stable close to the city gate, so he went to buy one horse, since he couldn't walk to where Reynolds was located. He didn't know if Reynolds was in Eternal City, or if he had left the city since he was currently hiding. After getting the horse, he rode to the forest close to Frost City, searching for a secret place where he could make the array. He found a hidden cave after a while, and immediately got to work. When they used the array to get into the trial land the last time, he picked up a few things from the array when it lit up. Now with his expanded knowledge of arrays, he was trying to make one by himself. Chapter 336. I'll need to try out a small-scale teleportation array before going for the big one, Gray said while looking at the empty cave. He hadn't made one before, so he couldn't simply make one here, then head to Eternal City, hoping it would work. He brought out a piece of paper and a brush and ink and started drawing array lines on them. Before trying them on the ground, he had the habit of first drawing the array lines on a piece of paper. He wouldn't be working with what others had previously made, like for the communication device. Instead, he would be trying to integrate his space element into a movement array. This is an array that, as its name suggests, boosts the speed of the one who makes it, or a selected few, while they are in the array. It's usually an array that covers a large area. This array is mostly used in wars. After completing the movement array on the piece of paper, he started searching for ways to modify it, so he could integrate the space element into it. Should I try it without modification? He thought with his hand rubbing his chin. After a few minutes, he decided to try it out. There are different ways to integrate the space element into the array, so he quickly started trying it out. First of all, he would get the coordinates of the spatial nodes of this place, then infuse them into the array. Once he's done with that, he would go to the last step, activating the array. Although there's no destination for now, he wasn't disturbed by that. What mattered was that the array worked. Gray sat crossed-legged with the piece of paper before him. After calming his mind, he started feeling the space around him. When he closed his eyes, it was like he was standing in the boundless space. Around him were multiple nodes connecting like an intricate array. He slowly started searching for the nodes, and after a few seconds, he located them. It wasn't that hard to locate, since it was shining brighter than the rest. After locating it, he slowly started trying to infuse the node into the array. It took him 5 minutes before he managed to complete it. "Damn," Gray exclaimed as soon as he was done. He was currently sweating profusely. Infusing the nodes wasn't too difficult, but it took a toll on him. As a result of not resting after using the space element repeatedly in the rice family, he was almost completely exhausted. Gray looked at the array on the paper. Well, it's time to try it. He brought out a single essence stone and tried activating the array. The lines on the paper lit up, accompanied by the essence stone Gray placed on it. Gray sensed the space element revolving around the array, which surprised him. He expected for it to at least have some issues, but it seemed to be working fine, or so he thought. Without further ado, he tried to see if it could transport something to another location. He took out the second paper and hastily infused another spatial node on it, a node that was in the same cave. After completing the second one, his face was completely pale, and he knew after this experiment, he needed to rest. He left the first paper in its original position, while he moved the other one a little further away from it. Phew, here goes nothing. Gray picked up a rock by the side, and just as he turned to the first paper, he noticed it was no longer lighting. It's completely exhausted the essence stone within such a small time frame. He was left flabbergasted by the consumption. Everything about the space element seems to yell high consumption to him. It didn't take him up to 3 minutes to complete the array and infuse the space element on the paper, yet the array on the first paper had completely exhausted the essence stone. One has to remember that this was a small-scale array. Gray couldn't help but shiver at the thought of the essence stones he'd need for the large-scale array. Luckily, I took quite a lot. He smiled slightly as he tapped on his spatial ring, taking out another essence stone. Only one of the arrays needs to be activated for them to work, so he didn't need to place any essence stone on the other paper. After placing the essence stone on the paper, the array lit up once again when he activated it. He hastily threw the rock in the paper. As soon as the rock came in contact with the array shone brighter, engulfing the rock. A few seconds later, Gray saw the other paper lighting up. After the light died down, he saw the rock on the other paper. Haha, success on the first try. Gray laughed out unconsciously. Given his previous luck whenever it came to things that had to do with research and experiment, he thought he might need to at least try it up to 5 or 6 times before he would succeed. He never expected to be successful right off the bat. This was a first for him, and he felt genuinely happy. Had Void not been injured, then he would have been extremely happy. Time to rest. If I stay up any longer, I might not be able to move properly for the next day, Gray thought before sitting down cross-legged. He had gotten used to always meditating whenever he was tired. Before he started his experiment, he made some detection arrays around the cave. That way, if someone wanted to sneak in, he would be alerted and prepare himself for whoever was coming. He quickly went into a semi-conscious state, recovering the essence he used while making the array. 6 hours later, Gray opened his eyes and looked around. The cave was dimly lit, indicating it was already dark outside. I didn't check the elemental grade for the space element. He suddenly recalled and closed his eyes once again, heading into the chaos space. Chapter 337. Gray's consciousness entered the chaos space. Since comprehending the darkness element and increasing its grade, he hadn't come here often. After entering, he looked around, and just like he expected, a new zone had appeared in the chaos space. It was the zone for the space element. His gaze stayed on the zone for the space element for a little while before switching his gaze to the mountain where the temple resided. He soon appeared on the temple, heading for the rock in the middle. He placed his hand on the stone, and just like usual, an energy moved into his body before going round and going back to the stone. A few seconds later, 7 colors lit up on the stone. 7 elements. To think a few years ago I had none, Gray thought when he saw the 7 colors on the rock. He didn't look at the rest, since he already knew their elemental grades. There were 2 blacks in the stone, but the one which took his attention was the one which seemed like it was drawing someone into it the longer they stared at it. When he looked closer, he was surprised to see a small purple light in the middle. Purple. It jumped right through 2 grades. Gray exclaimed on seeing the results of the test. After comprehending an element, he usually starts from the first elemental grade, but slowly grinding it to higher grades, or using natural treasures. Although, there had been one case where his elemental grade didn't start from pink. That was when he comprehended the water element. He was already close to comprehending the water element at that time, so after using the water heart pulse he acquired from the crocodile, which had black lightning back at the trial land, it went up to the orange grade as soon as he comprehended it. Could it be because of the energy waves I had to endure? He asked himself a little confused. That was the only thing he could think of which could improve the elemental grade of the space element after comprehending it. His excitement quickly died down, and he left the chaos space. For some reason, he couldn't bring himself to be excited because of the space element. Whenever he thinks about his success, he'd recall how his actions hurt Void. Sigh after waking him up, then I'll be able to celebrate. Gray sighed. Wait, if it's already purple and the consumption is this high, how would it feel like if it were in the pink grade? Come to think of it, I never checked the elemental grades for Void's element. He thought out loud. Since Void hatched, he never thought of checking his elemental grade. Maybe it was because he had never actually heard of people checking the elemental grades of magical beasts before. It was after seeing the elemental grade of his space element did the thought come to him. If his elemental grade was purple yet the consumption was that high within that short time, then how high was Void's, since he could use it for longer? I'll find out when he wakes up. For now, it's time to make the array. Gray quickly threw the thought to the back of his head. There was no need brooding over it when Void's asleep. Once he gets the treasure and wakes him up, then he'll find a way to check his elemental grades. With the help of the array he drew on the paper, it didn't take him long to draw the array, nor find the spatial nodes. The only part that was harder was actually trying to integrate the space element into the array, since it was bigger. For almost 30 minutes, he was done with the array. This was the first teleportation array in the entire continent, well, except for the one that led to the trial land, and probably more that are unknown to the people living in the continent. After completing the array, Gray was once again exhausted, but this time, he was better compared to the first time. I'll rest for the night. Since it was already dark, there was no need to start the journey. He'll wait till it's bright before setting out. The next morning, Gray quickly left the cave, making sure to seal it completely. He not only sealed the opening with his earth element, but he also created an array around it. With the help of a few essence stones, the array would be able to last for at least a month if someone who's proficient in arrays didn't break it, or someone in the Overlord plane. He also made precautions around the teleportation array, just in case someone managed to break into the cave. Without him activating it from the other side, there's no way others would know about it. This was possible with the help of the space element. Now he knew how Void was able to hide from experts in the Overlord plane without being caught. With everything set, he started his journey back to Eternal City. It had been just around 2 months since he left Eternal City. Now he was heading back. 12 days later. This isn't Eternal City, Gray muttered while looking at the city gates before him. He followed the route to Eternal City, but he forgot some of the parts, so he brought out the disc to use it to track Reynolds. But on getting to where Reynolds' light was coming from, it wasn't Eternal City. This city was smaller, even smaller than Red City. Gray guessed it was most likely a small town. There were multiple people coming and going at the gate of the city. Most of their expressions looked serious, and Gray could sense bloodlust from some of them. This must be a mercenary town, he thought. He had heard of these places. It's a town built and owned by mercenaries. A guild was created by some merchants and mercenaries some years ago. Gray didn't think it had already grown to become this big. After looking at the gate once more, he walked forward. Chapter 338. After walking into the town, Gray headed for the inn that wasn't far from the gates. Whenever he enters a new city or town, he has built the habit of first finding out what's happening in the place, before doing whatever brought him to the place. The inn he picked looked a little shady. The plaque that the name of the inn was written in was hanging vertically by the side of the inn, swinging from side to side. On entering the inn, he noticed it was filled with people. There were only about 2 empty seats or so. He calmly walked over to one and took a seat. As soon as he sat down, he overheard the conversation of the group sitting on the next table. Over half of the group was wiped out. A middle-aged man sighed with a sad look. "Damn that guy. He gave us false information. I'll kill him." Another man said angrily. "Yeah, if not for him, then we wouldn't have gone there in the first place." A slightly younger man said. Gray turned his head to look at the table. There were 6 people sitting around the table. There were 4 men in the group, the other 2 were ladies. Of the men, 3 looked middle-aged. The last one was younger, looking to be in his mid-20s. The 2 young ladies also looked to be in their mid-20s. "Hey, no one sent you guys there. You went on your own free will." A man from the next table scoffed. "Who called you into this?" One of the men from the first group yelled angrily, standing up. The rest of the people in the group immediately stood up to confront the other group. The inn went silent as the 2 groups attracted the attention of everyone. Gray, who was sitting close to them, stared at the group curiously. He tilted his head to look at a young man sitting not too far from there. The young man had a robe on, just like him. The lower part of his face was visible, and he could see him smirking while looking at the group that were in a heated quarrel. The young man suddenly sensed something and looked in Gray's direction. Gray turned his head after seeing that the young man noticed he was looking at him. A treasure, Gray thought to himself. Had Void been fine, then he wouldn't mind finding out what this treasure was. But now, he doesn't have the time to spare. Gray waited for a little longer, and other than the group who quarreled about the treasure, there was nothing else. All he heard the other people talking about was also the rumors of a treasure. According to the people, a lightning tree appeared at the heart of the Chimera forest. This forest has been ruled by a brutal chimera for hundreds of years. The chimera is said to be in the Overlord plane, and because of the uniqueness of the magical beast, it was extremely difficult to handle. Luckily, it had stopped getting involved with humans even when they entered its territory. The only time it attacks is whenever its interest is threatened. According to what was said, the reason it stopped attacking humans was because after a tough battle with multiple experts, they decided to call a truce. The Chimera would stop attacking people as long as they did not do anything against the rules it set. Surprisingly, the Chimera didn't say a lot. It only said it wouldn't attack if its interest was not threatened. At first, the experts thought they made a good deal. It was only after a few years did they find out that the Chimera had a lot of interests. After a few hundred years, they managed to find most of them. The Chimera hasn't shown any interest in the lightning tree yet, so some people felt they might be able to acquire it before it develops any interest in it. A lightning tree forms after a tree has been struck multiple times by lightning. There are a lot of requirements before a tree would successfully turn into a lightning tree. First of all, it has to be extremely strong, not like the average tree. Most trees would be destroyed from a single strike from a lightning bolt. The second requirement was the age of the tree. It would get to at least 300 years before there would be any chances of it turning into a lightning tree. With each strike from the lightning, the previously huge tree will slowly start shrinking. If the tree was initially over 100 meters, it would reduce to just half a meter in height with a thickness of a few inches. Experts say the tree goes through a refining process after each strike, but it hasn't really been verified, since no one has ever witnessed this event take place. Gray walked out of the inn. Ahead of him was the young man he saw in the inn, while the group were quarreling with the other group. The young man suddenly stopped and walked his way. "Excuse me, but can I interest you with a deal?" he said to Gray. Gray stopped and glanced at the young man. "Sorry, I'm not interested." After speaking, he started walking once again. "You're not someone simple, so I'll go straight to the point. The lightning tree was found by me and my group, but there's a strong lightning leopard guarding it. It seems to be waiting to refine it. Since you were able to notice me back in the inn, I know you're powerful. And besides, I can't seem to see through your plane." The young man chased after Gray and continued persuading. "I don't recall looking at you." Gray replied nonchalantly. "I'm willing to split it with you." The young man said, "Like I said, I'm not interested. Good day." Gray didn't change his mind and continued walking away. Even if he wanted to hunt for the treasure, he had no plans of going with the young man. Firstly, the young man must be the one the group were talking about. While he was in the inn, he sensed the cultivation planes of the group who were complaining, and he noticed that other than the two young ladies and the young man, the three middle-aged men were all at the peak of the origin plane. If over half of such a group could be wiped out, why would the young man who was in the 7th stage of the origin plane want to team up with him to hunt for the treasure? He's purposely spreading the rumor of the lightning tree. If my hypothesis is correct, it means he knew I wouldn't team up with him. He doesn't plan on going in the first place. Gray thought while walking in the busy street of the town. He walked to a hidden spot in the town before taking out the disc. After looking at the distance between his light and Reynolds's light, he calculated the direction Reynolds' light was coming from before going in the direction. It took him 20 minutes, but he finally stopped at a 2-story building. "It's coming from here. I'll find out what this place is before heading inches," he muttered while looking at the front of the building. He walked a bit further into the street before stopping at a small shop. After asking around, he found out that the building was surprisingly the headquarters of the guild. What's Reynolds doing in the guild's headquarters? He asked himself. After brooding over it for a moment, he decided against going inside. The Emperor was searching for them, so he didn't know if Reynolds was being held captive or not. He planned to wait till later in the night before going there. He would sneak into the building at night, then search for Reynolds. If Reynolds was in trouble, he would find a way to rescue him. If not, he'll speak with him, then give the device to him before leaving. Later that night, Gray suddenly appeared on the side of the guild headquarters building. After looking around, he sent his spiritual sense into the building, trying to figure out if there were people walking close to the other side of the wall. A few seconds later, he vanished and appeared inside the building. What looked like a reception desk was at the front facing the door of the building. The doors were currently locked, and no one could be seen around. Gray brought out the disc and started following it to where Reynolds's light was coming from. With the increase in his knowledge in arrays, he improved his personal disc. The closer he got to the other light, the more accurate it was. It seemed to zoom closer, so he could get a better idea of where the light was coming from. He continued following the light deeper into the building. Chapter 339. Gray soon appeared in a hallway. With the help of the space element, his aura was perfectly hidden. Added with the black clothes he was currently wearing, it was almost impossible to see him in the dark hallway. He followed the light until he stopped in front of one of the rooms. Here, without further delay, he vanished from the hallway. In the room, Reynolds could be seen sprawling on the bed, fast asleep. His mouth was slightly open, and drool could be seen coming out of it from the moonlight that was shining through the window. When Gray appeared in the room, he almost wanted to punch Reynolds in the face. "Really?" he asked before using the wind element to raise the bed sheet, placing it on Reynolds's body. When Gray appeared in the room, Reynolds was sleeping, but naked. On feeling the bed sheet touching his body, Reynolds opened his eyes, albeit lazily. His lazy expression disappeared when he caught a glimpse of the human shadow in front of him. He hastily stood up on the bed, throwing away the bed sheet in the process. Gray's mouth twitched repeatedly before he facepalmed. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he asked quietly. Gray. Reynolds narrowed his eyes to a slit, trying to get a better view of the shadow. Gray stepped closer to the window, allowing the moonlight to shine on his face. "Buddy, it's you," Reynolds exclaimed before jumping towards him with open arms. Gray's eyes twitched uncontrollably before he punched Reynolds on the head as he got close to him. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Gray asked again, exasperated. "Ouch. Fuck you, Gray. Do you want to kill me?" Reynolds shouted before jumping to his feet while cursing at Gray in an exaggerated manner. His sudden exaggerated movement annoyed Gray even more. "Ray, put on some clothes," Gray said with a long face. "What do you?" Reynolds paused mid-sentence and looked down. "Oh, crap. So what are you doing here?" he asked, walking leisurely towards where his clothes were kept. "You say I've completed the communication device. Alice already has one. I came to give you another." Gray looked at him. He was too tired to complain about the nonchalant nature of his current appearance. "Oh, that's great. Quick, give it to me. Let me talk to her." Reynolds ran back to him, without even putting on anything. Bam! Gray punched him on the head once again, this time a little harder. "Ouch, ouch, damn you," Reynolds shouted, but quickly turned around to wear his clothes. Some minutes later, "Don't try to contact her now, she might be sleeping," Gray said when he noticed Reynolds was trying to speak to Alice after he explained how the device worked to him. "Oh, I forgot. I was eager to talk to her." Reynolds scratched his head while chuckling. "What are you doing here?" Gray asked. From how carefree Reynolds looked and acted, it was easy to see that he wasn't under any danger. "After you left, I decided to leave Eternal City." Reynolds told him all about what he encountered after they separated. According to him, he traveled for a few weeks before coming across a caravan in a forest. The merchants were being attacked, and the mercenaries protecting them were already severely injured. At first, Reynolds didn't want to help, but after seeing a little girl who ran to the front of a young man trying to protect him from one of the beasts attacking, he couldn't sit still any longer. The beasts were all in the early stages of the origin plane. Even though he hadn't broken through to the 4th stage of the origin plane, he had no issues with fighting against these beasts. With the help of the injured mercenaries, he was able to quickly make do of the 8 magical beasts. After helping them, he found out that the young man and the little girl were the children of one of the founding merchants of the guild. He followed them here and got to hear the rumor of the lightning tree. Being a lightning elementalist, he naturally wanted to see if he could acquire it. With the help of that, he would not only advance in his stage, but his elemental warrior would grow stronger. "How are you so sure the rumor is accurate?" Gray asked after hearing his story. "Well, I'm not too sure about it, but from what I heard, the source is very accurate," Reynolds explained. He asked the people from the guild, and they said the source was accurate. So you'll be joining in on the expenditure ? Gray asked. "Yes, I wasn't too confident all this time, but with you and Void here, as long as an Overlord plane expert doesn't appear, then that tree is mine," Reynolds said confidently, smacking Gray's shoulder. Wait, where's Void?" Reynolds cut Gray short while looking around trying to find Void. He initially thought that Void was in the room, but since he was black, he couldn't find him. "Void is. Also, how did you sneak into my room without anyone or me finding out?" Reynolds cut him short again. He was about to continue speaking, but when he looked at Gray's expression, he hastily shut his mouth to allow him to speak. "Void is injured." Gray brought Void out of the spatial ring to show Reynolds. He went on to tell him how his greed caused Void's injury. "He'll be fine. I believe we'll be able to find the treasure," Reynolds said decisively. "Yeah, I hope so," Gray said with a sad look on his face. "Can I come with you to the magical beast forest?" Reynolds suddenly asked. When he first came in contact with Void, he wasn't too close with him. After all, only Gray could talk to him. But after he saw Void taking that attack for Gray, his impression of him shot up to a high level. Now he didn't see him as a magical beast, rather, he saw him as a friend. "No, I'll go alone." Gray shook his head. He knew Reynolds wanted to help, but he didn't plan to put him in danger. The magical beast forest was not like the trial land where the stage of the highest magical beast was the peak of the origin plane. In the magical beast forest, there are countless magical beasts in the Overlord plane. Chapter 340. When will you be heading to the Chimera forest? Gray asked. Since Reynolds wanted to acquire the lightning tree, he wanted to help him out before leaving. "A group would be setting out by tomorrow. I'll follow them," Reynolds replied. He tried bringing up the issue of accompanying Gray to the magical beast forest, but Gray refused. He knew Gray was only doing that because he didn't want him to get hurt, but he felt annoyed by it. If only he was stronger, Gray wouldn't need to protect him. It was just like the time in the trial land when Ethanth woke up. Gray stayed behind while telling them to run away. They knew it was not only because Void was there, but it was because he didn't want them to get hurt if Ethanth were to attack. To be honest, when he saw the dragon chasing after Gray, he couldn't help but wonder how Gray managed to run with that thing chasing him this far. He wasn't too confident he would be able to escape if he were in Gray's shoes. From that experience, he told himself he wanted to grow stronger, so he wouldn't need Gray's protection. But since leaving the trail land, he hadn't been able to improve his stage. This was the real reason he decided to travel around to try and see if he could get a chance to break through. When he heard about the lightning tree, he felt like this was the opportunity he was searching for. Okay, I'll accompany you. As long as someone above the Overlord plane doesn't show up, then you'll be fine, Gray said with a soft smile. Fine. Reynolds nodded with no other option. So, you've finally comprehended the space element? He asked again. Because of Void's injury, he didn't ask about the space element. But since they've put that matter on the side, he decided to ask about it. Yeah, Gray nodded. How does it feel like, moving through the space tunnels? Reynolds asked. Well, it's kinder. Gray and Reynolds continued speaking about other things, and before they knew it, it was already morning. Knock, knock, come in, Reynolds replied. Click. The door opened and a little girl around 6 years old walked in. Good morning, Uncle Reynolds, the girl said excitedly. Good morning, little lady. How are you doing today? Reynolds asked while hugging the girl. I'm fine, the girl replied. After leaving Reynolds' embrace, the girl noticed Gray sitting by the side. Uncle, who's this? The girl asked, pointing at Gray. He's Uncle's friend, Reynolds replied with a small laugh. Wow, Uncle, he's so beautiful, the girl said with stars shining in her eyes, making Reynolds burst out into laughter. Gray looked at the girl, a little embarrassed by the starstruck expression she had on her face. Who's beautiful? The voice of a man came from outside the room. Soon, a young man who looked to be in his early 20s walked into view. He had a handsome face, just barely above Reynolds if they compared them. His build was slightly chubby, but he couldn't be described as a fat person. The young man was around 6'1", taller than Gray and Reynolds. When the young man appeared in the room, his gaze followed the direction of his little sister, and for a second, he almost couldn't believe that Gray was a man. Damn, he's truly beautiful, he muttered. Cough, cough. Reynolds coughed twice when he heard the young man's words. He couldn't help but take a glance at Gray and winking. He laughed out after winking, making the silent room noisy. He was still laughing when the little girl dropped a bombshell. I want to marry him, the little girl said. Reynolds almost choked on his saliva while he was laughing, while Gray's face twitched repeatedly. Ow, Alexa, you can't marry him, the young man who was by the side said after a few seconds. Why not? I like him, so I'm going to marry him, the little girl said with both hands on her hips. Reynolds looked at the little girl, then at Gray's expression, before bursting out into laughter once again. Since the little girl walked in, Gray hadn't been able to say anything, since he truly didn't know what to say. Uncle, why are you laughing? The little girl pouted when she saw Reynolds laughing. Nothing, it's nothing. I think you and Uncle's friend will look good together, Reynolds said while doing his best to hold back his laugh. He found Gray's predicament hilarious. Gray and the young man looked at Reynolds after he finished speaking. If looks could kill, then Reynolds would have been long buried by now. The young man knew that there is naturally no way Gray would be able to marry his sister. For someone who looked this good, he would naturally have multiple companions. Even he, who wasn't as good looking as Gray, had 3, much less someone like Gray. Gray shut his mouth. He didn't try to say anything. Sigh, this is why I don't like going out, he complained inside. Whenever he goes out, there would always be a situation when he would be approached by a lady. There was this one time that he was not only approached by a lady who looked to be in her late 30s, but he was also approached by a man as well. They left the room with Alexa gluing herself to Gray. As they walked towards the hall, where the reception desk was located at the front of the building. Most of the people staying in the building were familiar with everyone in their group except for him. They would always give him a double take whenever they saw him, especially with the way Elixir was holding onto him. They soon got to the hall, and Gray was astounded by the number of people present there. There were at least 80 people in the hall already, and more seems to be on their way. Chapter 341. Are all of them going for the expenditure as well? Gray couldn't help but ask Reynolds on seeing the number of people present. Not really, only those at the late stages of the origin plane are allowed to go. Of course, there are a few who would go even with the warning from the guild. Reynolds explained. Oh, then why are you allowed to go? Gray looked at him. With the guild not allowing those below the late stages of the origin plane to go, he didn't understand why they'd allow Reynolds to go. Reynolds was powerful, but not to the extent of being able to fight against a late-stage origin plane elementalist. His elemental warrior could at best fight to a draw with a 7th stage origin plane elementalist. And from what Reynolds told him, they're not aware of him being a high-grade summoner. He suddenly felt a little suspicious of the guild. After all, this was not the proper way to show gratitude to someone who saved the children of an important member of the guild. At first, they tried persuading me not to go, since it was going to be dangerous. But after seeing my persistence, they decided to let me be. The leader of the expenditure has already made it clear to me that they cannot guarantee my safety. Reynolds said. At least they warned you beforehand. Gray threw away some of the suspicions he had towards the guild, after he heard it was only because Reynolds demanded they let him go. HMPH. Uncle Reynolds is the strongest. He'll beat that monster up. Elixir jumped into the conversation. She thought Gray was trying to play down Reynolds' strength. Haha, I'm sure he would. Gray chuckled but didn't say any more. The group walked to the front of the crowd gathered there, and on a small platform that was raised there, 3 men could be seen standing with hands behind their backs, facing the crowd. 2 of the men had long, well-trimmed beards, while the last man had a mustache. All 3 men had the same facial appearance that it's almost impossible to tell them apart. They had the same average body build, with the same length and color of hair. Luckily, 2 of them had a beard while 1 had a mustache. Gray felt the 2 with a beard were a perfect copy of each other. Added to the fact that they were wearing the same clothes, he almost thought he was seeing double. It's the Brothers of Destruction. With them around, what's the use in joining the expenditure? We'll only be cannon fodders to fight against the beasts there, since they will be the ones to acquire it. Different conversations were ongoing with the appearance of the 3 identical brothers. Brothers of Destruction. Gray gave Reynolds a questioning look. Reynolds raised both shoulders as if saying he didn't know anything about them. Gray and Reynolds turned their attention to the young man who accompanied them here. Seeing their gazes, the young man went on to tell them about the trio standing in front of them. According to him, the brothers were identical triplets, which Gray and Reynolds had already guessed. The reason the trio was called the Brothers of Destruction had to do with their elements. The 2 with a beard were lightning and fire elementalists respectively, while the last one with a mustache was surprisingly a darkness elementalist. Having such destructive elements, and the strength to boot, earned them the name Brothers of Destruction amongst the mercenaries. It was said that they were linked, hence none of them could advance above the other. All 3 of them had purple elemental grades for their elements. Oh, but that's a weird name, Gray unconsciously said with a nonchalant expression. Gray and his group were at the front of the crowd, not too far from the platform where the Brothers of Destruction were standing atop. His words were heard by a few people who stood close to them, as well as the 3 brothers who were standing on the platform. The hall suddenly went quiet, and the few people standing close to Gray and his group took a few steps back, distancing themselves from Gray and Reynolds. Gray was oblivious to what was happening because Elixir was tugging at his arm. Look, little lady, you need to grow for at least 15 more years before you can marry anyone. He tried explaining to her gently. 15 years? Elixir asked with a confused face. Yes, in 15 years' time, you can marry whoever you want. Gray paused during the last part of the statement, when he noticed a shadow looming over him. Huh! He turned around to see who it was. What did you just say? One of the brothers with a beard asked with a calm expression but fiery eyes. That you could marry whoever you want in 15 years' time. Gray blurted out what he just said to Elixir. A blank look appeared on the face of the man standing in front of Gray. He was not the only one who had that expression. Almost everyone who was close to them had the same expression. Reynolds was the only one who seemed to be trying to hold back his laugh. He was just like Klaus in some aspects, so he found this very funny. "What did you say?" the man asked once again. "Oh, sorry. I wasn't talking to you earlier." Gray apologized when he realized what just happened. The man looked at him with his fiery eyes. "I'm not talking about this. What you said about our name." "Huh? Name?" Gray asked with a confused look. It was only when he looked at Reynolds and the young man who was with them did he recall it. "Oh, that. Why would a grown-up man be worried about something like that?" he thought inside. He couldn't wrap his head around how a man would confront him, because he said their nickname sounded weird. Even he wouldn't be bothered if someone said his name was weird, much less his nickname, if he had any. Chapter 342. The hall fell into silence as everyone was waiting for Gray's reply. "Haha. I see even these egotistical triplets are here." A laugh was heard from behind the crowd. Everyone turned around to look at who was laughing. The crowd soon made way when they saw the duo who were making their way forward. The duo consisted of one man and a lady. They both had a smirk on their faces as they walked forward. The one who laughed previously was the man. "Well, aren't you a keeper?" The lady giggled when she saw Gray. "He's mine." Alexa suddenly stepped in front of Gray, shielding him from the lady who just walked in. The lady laughed when she saw Alexa's act. Gray, who felt he was in an awkward position when the lady appeared and spoke, felt even more uncomfortable with Alexa claiming him as hers. "Alexa, we spoke about this a few minutes ago. You'll have to wait for 15 more years before you can claim anyone." Gray explained softly to her once again. He was trying his best not to tell her in a hurtful way, since he didn't want to make Alexa sad. She was a cute little girl. The only downside was that she wanted to keep him. "What are you doing here?" The man who confronted Gray switched his attention to the duo who just walked in. "We're members of the guild just like you morons, so naturally we'll try to obtain this treasure." The lady who was speaking with Gray turned to the man as she replied, "HMPH, none of you is a lightning elementalist, so the tree is worthless for you people." The maid said, "Who says it's worthless? We've been looking for a fancy small tree to decorate our garden for some years now, and this lightning tree just happens to fit the bill. Isn't that right, dear?" the lady said, turning to look at the man she came in with. "Yes." the man nodded. "HMPH, the man from the trio snorted and turned back to the platform. Before leaving, he gave Gray a threatening look. After the man went back to the platform, the lady looked at Gray. "Don't worry, pretty boy. He wouldn't be able to harm you with us here. Besides, are you planning on going for the expedition?" she asked. She could tell Gray and Reynolds were young, and one of them is not even in the mid-stages of the origin plane. Well, she could sense Reynolds' stage, but not Gray. It was like Gray was shrouded in a cloak that perfectly hid his aura from the world. Gray and Reynolds nodded. Okay. The lady nodded before following behind her partner who was already ahead of her. They stood on the platform, along with the three brothers, as well as two more men who arrived not too long ago. Gray noticed that every single individual standing on the platform was at the very peak of the origin plane. A little boost, and they'll advance to the next plane, the overlord plane. They continued waiting for another 10 minutes before the man who would be leading the expedition walked in. By the time the man came in, there were already over 10 people on the platform. Stealing it from so many hands is not going to be easy. Gray whispered to Reynolds. "But you can," Reynolds said confidently. He could tell Gray wasn't the least bit nervous, so there's a chance he was confident about being able to acquire it. Thinking of it, he had never really seen Gray nervous before. He was always calm and collected. The only time he saw Gray going out of his usual behavior was when Void was hurt at the time they left the trial land. Of course, as long as an overlord plane expert doesn't appear, then I'm at least 60% sure of being able to acquire it. Gray replied confidently. While Reynolds was speaking, the man who would be leading the expedition stepped forward after having a little conversation with the group on the platform. "Everyone, I believe you all know why you're here, so I wouldn't go through the stress of explaining anything about it. You all know how it usually works here in the guild. Whoever acquires the treasure keeps it. Let's move out, the leader of the expedition said before stepping down from the platform. Well, that was quick, Gray said. Yeah, Reynolds nodded. Do they really follow this rule of whoever acquires the treasure keeping it? Gray asked Alex's elder brother who was there with them. There are few cases where they don't follow this rule. It's a guild after all, and without these rules, it wouldn't be able to keep these mercenaries in check, especially those who are used to stealing from others. Whenever these rules are breached, if the assailant is captured, they would face the necessary punishments, explained Alex's brother. Gray and Reynolds were at the back of the crowd as they listened to the young man's explanation. After walking out of the guild building, Alexa and her brother stopped at the front of the building. They naturally wouldn't be going on the expedition. Goodbye, Uncle Reynolds. Bring something for me when you come back. Alexa waved at Reynolds as he climbed on his horse. Gray headed to the tavern he stayed at, which was not too far from the guild, and acquired his horse. Because of his delay, the crowd left them behind, but he didn't really care about it. He preferred going on his own anyway, and with Reynolds with him, he wouldn't be bored. As they rode towards the Chimera forest, which was miles away from the mercenary town, Gray brought out the communication device. Reynolds immediately recalled that he wanted to speak with Alice, and quickly brought out his own as well. Hey, Alice, it's me, Reynolds, he said enthusiastically while waiting for her response. Ray, how are you doing? Alice's voice resounded in Reynolds' head a few seconds later. Haha, I'm fine now. I've missed speaking with you so much. Reynolds laughed out happily when he heard her voice. Gray smiled softly before looking at the device. He used his spiritual sense to check on Void, who was in the spatial ring. Hey bud, I've really missed you. Chapter 343. Gray found out from Reynolds that the journey would take about 2 or 3 days. They caught up with the main group a few hours later, and they decided to travel with them since it was safer. Later that night, the group set up camp on an open field after it got dark. They were surrounded by a huge forest, and they didn't want to take the risk of traveling through the forest at night, since they all knew powerful magical beasts are more active at night. Gray and Reynolds stationed themselves at the back of the camp, since Gray didn't want to stay close to the group. In the end, Gray estimated that only about 30 people decided to set out for the expedition. This was as a result of them not being confident in being able to obtain the treasure from the hands of people like the triplets, who were at the very peak of the origin plane. It was better they didn't get involved than to become cannon fodders who wouldn't get anything in the end. Not everyone would want to take the risk of trying. After all, the chances of them getting the treasure with their strength was very low. Reynolds had been speaking with Alice almost all through the day. Gray joined in their conversation for a few minutes before letting them be. I should try practicing that technique while we're here, Gray thought to himself. With the thought in mind, he quickly stood up from where he was sitting with Reynolds and started heading towards the south. He soon disappeared into the forest under the moonlight. After walking for almost 10 minutes, he stopped at an isolated area in the forest. A boulder could be seen in the area, surrounded by huge trees. Gray climbed onto the boulder and sat down. He spread his spiritual senses out, trying to ensure the area was completely safe. 2 minutes later, he opened his eyes before opening his palm. A scroll appeared on his palm the next second. The scroll was completely black. He got this scroll in the trial land, just after Void hatched from the egg. At that time, he didn't have any use for it, since he didn't have the space element. The name of the technique was the Great Void Movement Technique. It involves shuttling through the void at an incredible speed. According to the description, once Gray attains beginner level mastery of the technique, he could shuttle through a distance of at least 500 meters. The overall distance he could shuttle through after attaining beginner level mastery solely depends on his elemental grade, but he would be able to at least cover a distance of 500 meters. This was not the first time he was trying this technique. He tried using it to comprehend the space element the first time he acquired the technique, but he was unable to. With the knowledge he had from the previous times, he slowly started trying out the technique again. Gray sat down in a meditative position and tried following the instructions on the scroll. He had to first create 2 space tunnels almost simultaneously. After creating them, he would connect them to make the movement instantaneous. After connecting the 2 tunnels, the movement speed is faster compared to the normal one a space elementalist uses. The tunnels must be stable, or else they might collapse while the space elementalist is going through it. The danger of being caught in a collapsed space was extremely high, especially for someone like Gray, whose control over the space element was minimal. Gray started with the first process, which was creating the space tunnels simultaneously. He tried it the first time and failed. He tried a second, third, fourth and continuously, but he continued failing. Luckily, he noticed after each failure, he was getting better at it. Time flew by, and before he knew it, it was already almost daybreak. Even after trying countless times, he was unable to make it. He didn't feel downhearted, since he naturally knew he wouldn't be able to get it once. At the camp, the group were already getting ready to continue their journey, going through the forest. The leader of the expedition gathered everyone. As you all know, there's a sentient plant in this forest. Although we would be able to dodge them at night time, we would also endanger ourselves because of the beasts in the forest. These plants are extremely poisonous, but luckily, they're plants and are very weak towards the fire element, he explained. The leader created a strategy for the group to travel through the forest. Since the plants are weak towards the fire element, fire elementalists would be positioned around the group, placing the other elementalists in the middle. This would minimize the risk while also helping them move faster. Everyone agreed to his plan, and they soon started getting into position before they departed. Gray came back just as they were about to leave. Reynolds was already trying to delay the group while waiting for Gray. So on seeing him, he heaved a sigh of relief, knowing he wouldn't need to bother himself with delaying again. What were you doing? He went closer to Gray and asked. Training, Gray replied before getting on his horse. Hare, trying not to get eaten by the plants. A cold voice came from behind the duo. When they turned around, they noticed the fire elementalist amongst the triplets was the one stationed close to where they were in the formation. Come on, let's move to the other side, Gray said while moving his horse to the left wing of the formation. The fire elementalist was taken aback when he saw Gray moving away. He initially wanted to go after the duo, but after seeing where they were headed, he smirked before staying put. You train too much, Reynolds said as they headed towards the left wing. I need to grow stronger, faster. You know our current predicament isn't great. The more we delay, the more we give them an opportunity to harm us. I hate feeling threatened, Gray said. Yeah, but try to take some time off, have fun. Reynolds laughed. I'll stop when I get to the top, Gray said blandly. Sigh, if only Klaus and Alice were here, they'd be able to make you loosen up easier, especially Alice. Reynolds said, recalling how Alice was able to convince Gray to always go out with them. Reynolds started speaking with Alice, telling her of Gray's unwillingness to take a break from training. In the end, Gray, Alice, and Reynolds started speaking with the communication device as they traveled through the forest. 10 minutes after walking into the forest, boom, an explosion rang out from the front. Gray and the Reynolds quickly tried to look what was happening. Ahead of them was a huge flower-like plant that had rows of teeth. It was spitting out a greenish fog that was spreading rapidly towards the group. Don't breathe in the fog, it's poisonous. The leader of the expedition's voice came from the front of the formation. He was a fire elementalist, and was the one who was leading the charge against the plant. A scream came from the right side. Gray turned around to see a man picked up by a huge vine. The man and his horse were both taken by the vine. The crowd sucked in a cold breath as they saw this. This was the first time Gray and a few of the people here were seeing this plant. Gray in particular found the situation strange, since he was used to seeing dangerous magical beasts, not plants. He had read of these plants at the Lunar Academy library, but he hadn't been able to see them. Boom. Screams was coming from different sides as vines wrapped around the legs and waists of horses, lifting them off the ground. Rustle. Gray suddenly heard the rustling sound of the leaves. When he looked below him, he saw the vines on the ground, slithering like a snake. Crap. How's this any less dangerous than moving at night? He said while creating a flaming whip that he used to lash at the vines. Ray, stay close. He turned to Reynolds. His expression changed when he noticed the vine that was around Reynolds' horse legs. Shit. Ray, jump, he exclaimed. The vine seems to be able to wrap around people without them being able to sense it. Only after the squeeze tight will they sense it. Reynolds reacted immediately he heard Gray's words. Due to the high trust he had developed for Gray over the time they had spent together, he didn't doubt his words even by the slightest. If he were to be standing at a cliff, and Gray said he should jump down, he would do it without a doubt. He knew there was no way Gray would do anything that would hurt him. Chapter 344. Reynolds kicked the back of the horse, using the force to propel himself towards Gray's horse. Gray stretched out his hand to catch Reynolds, who was mid-air, pulling him onto his horse. With a swipe of his hand, he sent a fire blade at the vine that was wrapping around Reynolds' horse. Even without being told, he naturally knew plants were weak against the fire element. "Thanks," Reynolds said after sitting behind Gray. "It's nothing," Gray said while squinting his eyes, looking around. He suddenly noticed something. In the left wing where they were the only ones the vines attacked. When he looked around, the other people were vine-free. He shifted his gaze to the man who was stationed there. Could it be an accident? Or did he purposely let them in? He asked himself. He couldn't figure out the answer, so he kept the matter at the back of his head for now. Reynolds returned to his horse after Gray exterminated all the vines in the area. Without being told, he moved closer to Gray, with their horses almost touching each other. As the group continued the journey, the fire elementalists were constantly destroying the vines, as well as the flower-like creature. After the first wave of attacks where the vines were able to snatch some people, the fire elementalists managed to completely hold them back. The plants retreated whenever they sensed the heat from the fire element. Gray studied the plants curiously from his horse, trying to figure out how they actually came to be. According to what he read, it would take hundreds of years, and staying in a place with a high concentration of essence before these plants could gain sentience. At this stage, their intelligence isn't really that high. But once they break through to the overlord plane, their intelligence would see an increase, taking it to that of a human's. These plants grow stronger by consuming humans as well as magical beasts. While Gray was looking around, he saw an unlucky boar that was caught by a vine. After catching the boar, the vine quickly moved towards the head of the plant. It opened its huge mouth, swallowing the boar in a single gulp. Gray had also witnessed this happen to the few people and horses who were caught by the vines during the first attack. Gray suddenly felt all his hairs standing on edge. Danger. Without trying to see what the danger was, he hastily jumped up, using the wind element to support himself mid-air. After leaping almost 10 meters off the ground, he suddenly felt something on his right leg. He looked down only to see a vine tightly wrapped around his ankle. Crap. Bam. Before he could react, the vine tugged at him forcefully, slamming him into the ground. Gray. Reynolds immediately moved when he saw Gray being slammed into the ground. But to his surprise, he suddenly felt a tug on his waist. Before he could do anything, he was dragged from his horse, slamming into the ground. Buzz. Lightning danced around his body as he struggled to escape from the vine that was wrapping around him. He sent an attack at the vine, but to his surprise, the vine seemed to be resistant to the lightning element. What? How? He asked as the vine hastily dragged him out of the formation they were in. The fire elementalist standing guard did nothing to stop the vines from dragging both Reynolds and Gray, who was a bit rocked after he slammed into the ground. After Gray was slammed into the ground, he could barely see anything, and just after he slammed into the ground, the vine dragged him and Reynolds out of the formation. Gray soon came back to his senses after being dragged out of the formation. Boom. Raging flames engulfed him, burning the vines that were wrapped around him. He stood up, preparing to run back to the formation, but his expression changed when he couldn't see Reynolds on his horse. He turned around only to see Reynolds struggling with lightning around him, trying to break free from the grasp of the vines. Gray infused his body with the wind element, dashing straight at the vine that was holding onto Reynolds. He didn't even think about holding back. Boom. He unleashed a ferocious blue tiger-looking flame that shot towards the main plant. While he was running towards Gray, multiple vines tried to stop him from advancing, but they were all cut down by the fire blade he held in his hand. He soon got to the vine holding onto Reynolds. After he attacked the main plant, the movement of the vines became relatively slower. By the time he got there, Reynolds had already managed to struggle free from the vine's clutches. Fuck this. I officially hate plants. Reynolds cursed as soon as he managed to break free. Gray grabbed onto him, dragging him as he hurried back to the formation. As they got closer to the formation, Gray saw the look of astonishment in the eyes of the fire elementalist, who was supposed to be protecting them. blue flames, the fire elementalist muttered. Gray and Reynolds were the only people who had managed to escape back into the formation after being dragged out from it. There were a few people who were surprised by Gray's performance. One of them was undoubtedly the fire elementalist amongst the triplets. Seeing Gray's rare blue flames for some reason increased the hatred he had towards him. The couples who intervened back at the guild were also very surprised by Gray's performance. The man among the duo was already on the verge of running out of the formation when he saw both Gray and Reynolds being taken by the vines, but after seeing how Gray easily took care of the situation, he halted. After stopping, he sent a warning gaze towards the fire elementalist that was stationed there. When the vines first attacked Gray and Reynolds, he took note of the area, and he had noticed that Gray and Reynolds were the only two who were attacked. He knew this wasn't an accident. The fire elementalist let the vines in on purpose. Chapter 345. Gray glanced at the fire elementalist as they stepped back into the formation. He had already guessed what was going on, and he had made a few decisions, and one of them was that this guy was not going to make it back from this expedition. "Wow, it's nice you're all right, pretty boy," the lady came over and said with a smile. Gray forced out a smile. He wanted to tell off the lady that his name wasn't Pretty Boy, but seeing that she was a little concerned about them even though they didn't really have any previous relationships, he decided against it. "Yeah, someone seems to be doing a really bad job at keeping the vines out," Gray said, making sure the fire elementalist heard his statement. He made the mistake of thinking it was an accident the first time, hence he let his guard down. But now that he knew it was being done on purpose, he wouldn't let this happen again. "Of course, what do you expect from these half-assed fire elementalists?" the lady said, looking straight at the fire elementalist. Most of the people in that area could tell that the fire elementalist was targeting Gray and Reynolds, but it had nothing to do with them. They all came here for the treasure. The lesser the people, the better their chances. After seeing Gray's display a few minutes ago, they all knew they couldn't count him out of the picture. The vines could withstand the attack of a late-stage elementalist, and although Gray's fire was super effective against them, it didn't take out the fact that it was powerful. The fire elementalist didn't speak against them because of the couple who were with them. The couple stayed with Gray and Reynolds as the group continued heading further into the forest. 1 hour later, Psy were finally free of those hateful plants. Reynolds sighed as the group left the forest. After spending just over 1 hour in the forest, the party was able to exit the forest. A few more people were snatched away by the plants, but luckily, most of them made it out. Gray estimated that about 8 or 10 people died during this 1 hour, which was a high number, given the fact that there were just over 30 people who came for the expedition. "They're not that bad," Gray said with a chuckle. "Yeah, easy for you to say. You're not the one whose attacks don't have any effect on them." Reynolds snorted. "You're alive, that's what is important, right?" Gray asked. "I guess so," Reynolds said. He felt a little scared after almost being eaten by the plant. Even if he wanted to die, he didn't want to be killed by a plant. If Klaus were to find out about him being killed by a plant, he would definitely mock him even in death. The leader of the expedition addressed the group after they left the forest. Apparently, this was only one of the few dangerous routes they would pass through before getting to where the lightning tree was located. According to the leader, there were 2 more places that were as dangerous as this forest, if not even more. After going through these routes, they would also have to face the dangers that were lying in wait in the Chimera forest. Gray felt at least half of the group who started the expedition would most likely be killed before they even got to where the treasure was. He wanted to object on the path that they were taking, but seeing that the mercenaries weren't complaining, he shut his mouth. After the leader finished speaking with the group, they continued their journey. They didn't face any challenges for the rest of the day. After it got dark, the group made camp at an open field. Gray realized these people were already very familiar with the routes, so they seemed to be calculating their movements, always stopping at an open field surrounded by trees. This time, the couple stayed closer to them. Gray stayed with Reynolds and the couple for a few hours before heading into the forest. He still had to train on the Great Void technique, so he couldn't stay and chat with the couple. The couple was stunned when they saw Gray heading into the forest. After asking him what he wanted to do, they were even more surprised when he said he was going to train. After walking through the forest, Gray saw a cave. This should do, he said, but after taking a step forward, he paused. No, I'll find somewhere else. Growl. Hearing the growl, Gray knew the beast was at the late stages of the origin plane. Although he could kill it, he didn't want to go through the hassle. And not just that, but since he got close to Void, he had a change towards magical beasts. Unlike before when he would kill the beast without any remorse, he now had a slight difference in attitude towards them. He retreated from the entrance of the cave and started walking in another direction. Before long, he saw another cave. This one was luckily empty. When he walked in, he could sense that a magical beast lived in the cave, and it seemed like it went out to hunt for the night. Without wasting any time, he created some arrays around the entrance of the cave to make sure the beast didn't enter while he was engrossed with his training. He was still in the first phase of the training, simultaneously creating 2 space tunnels. With the experience he got from the previous day, he felt a little more confident in being able to at least create the tunnels today. The next morning, Gray walked to the entrance of the cave only to see a white tiger lying outside the cave. The tiger was in the early stages of the origin plane. Sorry, I had to make use of your home, but you can have it now, Gray said to the tiger, which stood up as soon as it saw Gray. Gray released a bit of his aura to scare the tiger from attacking while he spoke with it. The tiger watched him as he left the cave, walking back to the camp. Chapter 346. Gray joined up with Reynolds just before the group set off. Wait, you trained all through the night? The lady asked when she saw Gray coming back. Gray nodded. Wow, such diligence. No wonder you're powerful, the lady said with stars in her eyes. She hadn't seen anyone like Gray for a long time now, so seeing how trained during the night, she couldn't help but praise him. Yeah, that's how he usually is. He trains all through, never having time for anything else, even going out with friends, Reynolds said while scratching his head with a smile. The group continued talking as they headed into the forest. This forest was not as dangerous as the one they walked through the previous day. Although they occasionally encountered magical beasts at the peak of the origin plane, they didn't engage them since the beast retreated as soon as they sensed them. Their journey was relatively smooth for that day, and day soon turned to night. After the group set up camp, Gray headed into the forest around them like he had been doing for the past nights. The next morning, we'll be going through 2 terrains, a swamp and a rocky mountain. We'll be depending mainly on the lightning elementalists when we get to the swamp, while fire and water elementalists will handle the rocky mountains, the leader said to them. He didn't say much to them, since all the mercenaries were familiar with the area, except for Gray and Reynolds. These were the 2 places he said would be as dangerous as the forest that was occupied by the plants. Finally, a place where my attacks would be effective, Reynolds said with a sigh of relief. Gray casually looked around. Having 7 different elements made him the most versatile elementalist alive. No matter the condition, he would have the element that could counter it. He would be complete once he comprehends the light element. That would make him have all 8 elements he knew of. There was also the possibility of the wood element that Wood Fanatic spoke about, but he wasn't thinking about that for now. 2 hours later, the group stopped, looking ahead of them. In front of them was a large swamp. The horses will be safe here. We'll complete the rest of the journey on foot, the leader of the expedition said as he highlighted his horse. The rest followed suit, tying down the horses by the trees. Are they safe here? Reynolds asked the couple while he was tying his horse to a tree. Yeah, this isn't our first time coming here. As long as the horses stay put, they'll be fine, the lady said. There's an array around this area. Although some mercenaries tend to act mindlessly, they know the value of having a horse in such an area, Gray said while tying his horse. Such sharp senses, looks like I keep underestimating you. The man looked at Gray, impressed. Not all the mercenaries here knew of the array that was placed here to protect the horses. Yet Gray, who was coming here for the first, was able to sense it immediately. It's not really that hard to notice. I picked up the clue when that guy said we should leave the horses here. Given the journey, there's no way he'd want us to go back on foot, since it would be extremely taxing and dangerous, Gray explained. You picked it up just from that? The man asked, a little taken aback. Yeah, Gray nodded. That, and because I'm exceptionally proficient in arrays. I've sensed this array from over 500 meters away, Gray scoffed inside. Even though these people seemed to be good to them, there's no way he was going to tell them he was good at arrays. The leader of the expedition was the first to step into the swamp. After he entered, the others followed behind him. When Gray got to the swamp, he placed a finger in it and sent out a slight vibration using the earth element as base. This was a technique he learned after reading about bats using echolocation. He would use the earth element, creating some sort of inaudible vibrations from his fingers. The vibration will spread out from where he was standing, covering an area of at least 400 meters radius. He rarely used it previously, but in an area like this swamp, it was quite handy. He would be able to locate the magical beasts hiding in the swamp. Reynolds and the couple looked at him strangely, not comprehending why he placed his finger in the swamp. They were the last group to head into the swamp. There are 2 magical beasts within 100 meters from here, in that area. They can't be counted as powerful, but with a surprise attack, they wouldn't have any problems with taking out an elementalist in the late stages of the origin plane. Gray explained. You sensed them just by placing your finger in the swamp? The lady asked, surprised. I'm a survivor. I try to learn as many useful things as I can. You can never know when they might come in handy. Gray shrugged before stepping into the swamp. After he placed his leg on the swamp, his leg sank to the knee level before stopping. This will impede my movement, he thought. He used the wind element to wrap his legs from the foot to his knees. The wind moved the muddy water as he walked through it, making it feel as if he was walking on plain ground. Reynolds and the couple followed behind Gray. For some reason, he unconsciously became the leader of their small group. The few times the couple saw him in action, he earned their respect, especially after seeing how he was able to easily sense the array and the magical beasts hiding in the swamp. Gray, how are you walking so freely? Reynolds asked while struggling through the muddy swamp. Oh, it's another skill I picked up from reading books. Gray shrugged it off, refusing to tell him the reason. Reynolds wanted to reprimand him at first, but after recalling Gray's usual behavior, he guessed he was probably hiding something from the couple. After walking around 50 meters forward, splash, boom, something jumped out from the swamp, dragging one of the men in the group in. Before the attack of the man standing close could reach the beast, it dragged the man inside. What was that? A man exclaimed. The beast acted very fast, giving no one the time to see its features. The lower the number of people who reached the place, the better, Gray thought. He could sense there was a reason the leader decided to pass through this route, and if his guess was correct, it was to reduce the number of people who would reach where the lightning tree was located. Reynolds and the couple tensed up when they saw this. Reynolds tensed up because he hated sneak attacks. The couple tensed up because the person who was dragged down was someone who was at the peak of the origin plane, just like them. How did the beast hide its presence that well? The lady asked, looking in Gray's direction. I have no idea, but with my technique, I have no issues with locating them, Gray said. Gray continued walking ahead of the group, guiding them through the swamp, unhindered. Some of the individuals in the main group tensed up when they saw the man who was grabbed into the water. 10 minutes later, 3 more people had been dragged into the swamp. The speed of the beast's attack was something they couldn't keep up with. But this wasn't the first time some of them had come here, so they were prepared. In the past 10 minutes, 2 magical beasts had been killed by the group. The beasts were fishes which seemed to have things like arms below their fins. They had sharp rows of teeth which could easily bite through a human. This place is around 1 kilometer or so we'll be exiting soon, the lady explained. Gray estimated they had walked around 800 meters in 10 minutes. If they were alone, then they would have exited the swamp by now. But since they didn't want to attract attention from the others, they walked at a slower pace. Another 5 minutes went by before the group exited the swamp. 1 more person died before they left the swamp, while 6 more magical beasts were killed in the space of 5 minutes. After exiting the swamp, the group didn't delay and immediately headed towards the Rocky Mountain. The leader of the expedition wanted them to get to the Chimera forest before nightfall. They walked for another hour before the visage of the Rocky Mountain showed up before them. Which magical beasts occupy this mountain? Gray asked the couple as they headed towards the mountain. Apes. The couple replied simultaneously. Chapter 347. Apes. Gray looked at the mountain curiously. stone apes to be precise. The leader of the stone apes is at the peak of the origin plane. We've encountered it a few times, but it's too strong, so we tend to always escape," the man said, making the lady chuckle. Apes are generally known for their strength. Stone apes are regarded as one of the strongest in the ape species. Due to the immense strength, the earth element adds to their already great strength. "I'd like to see how powerful their physical bodies are," Gray thought. His physical strength has grown slightly weaker compared to his cultivation strength. Gray and Reynolds continued speaking with the couple, who were telling them about some of their adventures and near-death experiences. Gray listened intently to their stories, trying to gather knowledge from the stories. The group soon got to the foot of the mountain. They immediately started the climb. When they got there, they climbed for only about 3 minutes before encountering the first ape. These apes usually move in hordes, so seeing one means more weren't far from it. The ape stood at around 3 meters, with a dark brownish fur. The group quickly made a move on the stone ape, killing it before it was able to call for others. The leader of the expedition had advised that it would be better if they did not have a brawl with the apes. Their numbers had reduced by over 30 from when they set off from the town. The apes would have the advantage in numbers, but there was only one ape that's at the peak of the origin plane, so the group had the advantages in terms of individual strength. After they killed the first ape, they extracted the beast core before moving forward. They walked for another 20 minutes, killing 8 more apes as they advanced. Gray felt astounded by the proficiency of the group. He watched on as they killed the apes in a matter of seconds, not giving them even the chance to make as much as a single noise. They soon got to the middle of the mountain. As they went higher, the frequency in encountering the apes increased by a large margin. There are times they would encounter 2 or 3 as they went higher. According to the couple, the leader of the ape resided on the eastern part of the mountain, not at the mountain top, so they weren't worried about meeting it at the top. By the time they got to 3/4 of the mountain, they encountered a small horde of apes. The horde contained about 12 stone apes, all in the origin plane. 4 were in the late stages, while the rest were in the mid and early stages. The group was quick to attack. Gray, Reynolds and the couple were at the end of the moving group, so they didn't bother themselves with attacking with the others. Instead, they looked around, making sure that their backs were safe. Roar! One of the late-stage origin plane stone apes roared, calling for backup from the others in the mountain. Rumble! A few seconds later, Gray suddenly felt the ground shaking. Even some pebbles were bouncing on the ground. He looked behind him, and his facial expression changed. Crap! He complained about the sight before him. Over 50 stone apes were charging towards them, and in front of the stone apes was a larger one, almost 2 times the size of the others. Gray didn't need anyone to point it out to him. That was definitely the leader of the apes. They were at the back of the group, so naturally, they had to fight against the apes that were running over from this direction. "We'll hold off the leader. You two try to stay alive," the man said, stepping in front of Gray and Reynolds. His wife joined him as well. Gray, seeing the situation, didn't try to stop them. Even though he was powerful, there was no way he could fight against that ape in his current state unless he uses the fusion state. They stepped to the side, preparing to fight against the weaker ones, at least those in the late stages of the origin plane. Boom! The couple attacked the stone apes simultaneously. Surprisingly, both husband and wife were water elementalist. The wife made a water snake that she sent towards the ape, trying to halt its movement, while the husband created an ice hammer that he slammed into the ape. Bang! The stone ape threw out a punch, enforced with the earth element. When its fist came in contact with the ice hammer, the hammer shattered on impact. It tried to hold onto the tail of the snake, but since it's made of water, its hand passed through it. The water snake coiled around its legs, before turning into a semi-solid state, so that it would be powerful enough to hold it down. The ape was stopped for a few seconds by this, but after it forcefully moved its legs, the water snake was ripped into 2. With the couple holding off the leader of the stone apes, Gray and the others started fighting against the other apes. Gray was facing off against a late-stage stone ape using the fire element. He sent multiple fireballs at it, which exploded in impact. The ape was forced back by the explosion. After taking a few steps back, it grabbed a huge boulder from the ground and crushed it to smaller pieces. After crushing it, they floated into the air, before shooting straight for Gray and the people who were around him. Gray looked around, and to his surprise, the fire elementalist who allowed the vines reach for him and Reynolds was just within the attack range of the stones the ape sent. He squinted his eyes, and a cunning smile appeared on his face. With a light and swift movement, he took a step forward. As his feet touched the ground, an earth wall rose from the ground, blocking the pieces of stones that were shooting towards them. He made the wall a little softer in the area where the fire elementalist was. The fire elementalist was focused on fighting against the stone ape that charged at him, but he naturally had his eyes around the battlefield, so as to be able to escape from sneak attacks. He initially wanted to move out of the area of the attack, since he was just at the end of the range. If he moved 4 or 5 meters forward, he would be able to go out of the attack range. But on seeing the earth wall that sprang up, he decided against it. Moving forward would put him in the attack range of 3 more apes, so he was glad he didn't have to move. The fire elementalist didn't know who set up the earth wall, but for some reason, he felt uneasy. He swept the feeling of unease out of his mind as he focused on the ape before him. Crack! Hu Kai! Multiple stones easily passed through the earth wall, piercing into the body of the fire elementalist. He managed to react, but he was a little bit slow, so he was hit in his throat and on his back. Blood started gushing out of his throat since the stone passed through it, leaving a hole in it. He held onto his bleeding neck with one hand as he turned around to look at the earth wall. His eyes widened when he saw that only the part where he was located was breached through. He looked further back and noticed the one who created the wall. Gray was looking at him with a small smirk. His eyes widened even further, his sockets almost popping out. He tried to speak, but he spat out a mouthful of blood as he opened his mouth. Bam! The stone ape he was previously fighting against quickly capitalized on the time he used in turning and looking at Gray. The ape smacked him to the ground with its huge hand, crushing his head in the process. Gray removed the wall when he noticed the attack had stopped. No one noticed the small exchange between Gray and the fire elementalist, because everything happened in a matter of seconds. From the time Gray created the earth wall to the time the fire elementalist was killed by the ape wasn't even close to 10 seconds. This was the second element Gray had used in front of the group. Although he previously used the wind element at the forest, he didn't make it known, only using it to enhance his speed. If an Overlord plane expert were to be around, they would naturally notice it, but since they were all in the origin plane, they would see the things he wanted them to see. That's how you do it, Gray said inside, as if schooling the fire elementalist on how to secretly kill someone in the presence of others. Unfortunately, there's no way for the fire elementalist to learn, since he was already dead. Chapter 348. Gray attacked the ape after dismissing the earth wall. Swoosh! To the surprise of everyone, Gray charged towards the ape and threw his fist at it. Seeing Gray, the ape threw its huge fist at him. Under the surprised gaze of everyone, Gray and the ape's fist collided. Bang! The ape was sent flying when the two fists collided. Gray coated his fist with the fire element, so when his fist made contact with the ape's fist, it caused an explosion, sending the ape flying. Wow, such powerful flames! The lady exclaimed when she saw Gray was able to actually send the ape flying. Very few of them would be able to accomplish this feat of his. The few people who saw him sending the ape flying unconsciously added him among the people who were favorites to obtain the lightning tree. One of the reasons they felt this way was because of his insane speed. Some of them had noticed it at the forest when they were attacked by the vines, so seeing him show such strength, added with the speed, they felt he was someone who should be placed at the top with the others at the peak of the origin plane. He's gotten stronger. Reynolds looked on as Gray retreated after sending the ape flying with a punch. He smiled wryly. He was happy seeing his friend improving so much, but this placed more pressure on him. Being close to someone like Gray would naturally push anyone to want to improve faster. The truth was, Gray was actually the reason he decided to leave Eternal City quicker. When he watched Gray defeat that group that was chasing after him, he felt inspired to train further. The weeks he spent traveling had yielded a good result, only he wasn't as dedicated as Gray. He couldn't spend all his time training. Just like Klaus, he liked having fun sometimes. Retreat as you fight. The leader of the expedition's voice rang out from the front. He was a bit stronger than the couple individually, but if the couple fought him as a team, they would be able to defeat him. Gray already understood this. This was why he didn't chase after the ape, after sending it flying, even though that was the best time to kill it. The couple continued fighting against the leader of the apes. After the group at the forefront killed the beast in front of them, some of them moved to the back so as to help the people at the back. Huh? Wes Roberts, the fire elementalist amongst the triplets, asked when he came to the back. He's dead, he got careless. One of the fighters at the back told him about the guy who was killed. They were all familiar with each other, so they naturally knew the name of the guy Gray plotted against. How's that possible? I've known him for years. He's not one who would neglect an enemy in front of him, the fire elementalist said with a surprised look. After thinking about it, he decided to keep it at the back of his head, since they were in a difficult position. Luckily, the apes don't usually leave the mountain, so as long as they are able to get to the other side of the mountain, then they would be able to escape from the assaults of the apes. 10 minutes later, the group was still fighting against the apes. They had already gotten to the top of the mountain, and had been able to kill almost 5 apes, but 2 more from the group had died under the assault of the apes. Gray was still amongst the people who were fighting against the apes at the back of the group while they retreated. Some of the people had changed with others after they started getting tired, but he refused to change with others. He enjoyed fighting, and long fights are always beneficial to him. He is using these apes to hone himself, and unlike the others, he hadn't been hurt by any of the apes. The couple watched him in surprise. They could almost see his improvements as the battle raged on. What they found even more astonishing was the fact that he hadn't been hit, not by a single strike. Reynolds was still on the battlefield, fighting against the apes in the mid-stages of the origin plane. Although they were stronger than him, the pressure was exactly what he needed. After leaving the trial land, he was unable to break through. The thickness of the elemental essence here was lesser than the one in the trial land, so advancing had become a little difficult. Battles like this were exactly what he wanted. He wanted to use them to push himself further. The group continued fighting against the apes for almost 1 hour, and in this time, they had managed to just go past the middle of the mountain. Because of the constant attacks of the apes, descending was slower than when they were ascending the mountain. Over 20 apes had been killed in this time, and 5 more from the group had been killed. Currently, they were not even up to 15. All the people who were still alive were either at the late stages of the origin plane, or at the peak of the origin plane, with the exception of Gray and Reynolds. The leader of the expedition would occasionally throw a glance at Gray and Reynolds, especially Reynolds, surprised that he was still alive. The reason he took this route was to eliminate all the weaklings and, of course, use them as cannon fodders. Some of them knew this, but their greed wouldn't let them stop. Disperse. The leader of the expedition suddenly ordered, ditching the leader of the apes he was fighting against. Gray charged over to where Reynolds was fighting against an ape. He threw a punch that forced the ape to retreat. After the ape retreated, he held onto Reynolds, dashing away with him. Reynolds boosted himself with the lightning element, so it wouldn't feel as if he was being carried by Gray. The apes were slower since they were of the earth element, which meant they had more strength, but lesser agility. This was something Gray had grown accustomed to while he was still in the trial land. If he said he came second when it came to running away from magical beasts, then no one would dare say they were the first. He could almost say the time he spent in the trial land was for honing his escaping skill. He wasn't too proud of it, but he knew this was a necessity in surviving. Gray was able to get to the foot of the mountain before even the leader of the group could. This once again shocked everyone who went for the expedition, except for Reynolds, who already knew Gray. When they got to the foot of the mountain, they continued heading forward, since the apes would naturally attack them if they stayed there any longer. 2 hours later, the group was once again faced by another challenge, but this time, it was from other humans. When they got to the entrance of the Chimera forest, they saw 2 other groups camping outside the forest. The 2 groups consisted of around 12 to 18 people. Gray looked at one of the groups closely, and he saw a familiar face. The young man he met at the inn when he entered the town. When he joined the guild for the expedition, he thought the young man would be among them, but to his surprise, he wasn't from the guild. Gray glanced at the young man for a few seconds, and just like the time at the inn, the young man noticed him, giving him a nod as a sign of greeting. Gray nodded as well, before shifting his gaze to the other camp. The first camp was occupied by mostly people in their early and late 20s, but the second camp was occupied by middle-aged people. It was already almost sunset, so the leader of the expedition decided they should set up camp for the night. Gray went out at night just like the previous days. He wouldn't slack even for 1 day. While he was heading into the forest, he sensed 3 people following him. In the forest, Gray stopped in front of a tree which had a hole in it. "Come out, I believe we can speak freely here." He turned around. The young man from the inn walked out from behind a tree, accompanied by 2 young ladies. "Such sharp senses. This was why I wanted you to come with me for this trip," the young man said, clicking his tongue. Cut to the chase. "What do you want?" Gray said casually. "I'm offering you the same deal, except this time, we'll be sharing it among us 4, the young man said. "And what about your group?" Gray asked. "They're just here to help us acquire it, but I don't think there'll be enough," the young man said. "I'll think about it." Chapter 349. "I'll think about it," Gray said, after seeing the trio continue standing there. He asked, "Anything else?" "No, we'll be leaving now," the young man said, before turning around. "Wait," Gray called out to them. The young man paused, turning around to look at Gray. "Where are you from?" Gray asked curiously. "Is that important?" the young man asked. No, you can go." Gray waved them off before jumping onto the branch of the tree. He didn't enter the hole yet, since he didn't want the young man to know what he wanted to do. The young man nodded, before leaving with the 2 young ladies. Gray sat atop the tree branch, contemplating the young man's offer. To be honest, he wasn't interested in the offer. After hearing what happened to that group, he didn't trust the young man one bit. "If I'm able to use this technique before we see the treasure, then I'm confident in being able to obtain all of the lightning tree," Gray thought while working on an array around the tree. After making the array, he stepped into the hole. The next morning, Gray came out of the forest earlier this time since they would be setting out sooner. There are multiple magical beasts in the late stages of the origin plane. As you all know, the chimera isn't the only overlord plane magical beast in this forest, it's only the strongest. Most of you already know where to avoid while we're going into the forest. The leader of the expedition gave a small briefing to them about the forest. Gray and Reynolds were the only ones who didn't know where to avoid while moving in the forest. Luckily, the couple was with them. They brought out a small map, handing it to Gray. There were different places marked on the map. Some of the marks were bigger, while others were smaller. According to the couple, the larger marks was considered the most dangerous. It was occupied by overlord plane magical beasts, while the smaller ones were areas that were occupied by magical beasts, at the peak of the origin plane. "Thank you." Gray showed his gratitude to the couple for their help since they started the journey. "It's nothing. The reason we initially started helping you guys out is that my wife hated the triplet, so anything she could do to annoy them was fine. But in the end, you guys are pretty nice, especially you," the man said, looking at Reynolds. They spoke more with Reynolds, so they felt closer to him. Gray smiled when he heard this. He wasn't really bothered if the couple liked him or not. "Why did you guys come for this expedition when the lightning tree is of no use to any of you?" he asked curiously. He recalled hearing the fire elementalist amongst the triplet asking them what they were doing there when they had no use for the lightning tree. And throughout the journey so far, the couple had been using only the water element. "And who says it's of no use?" the man said with a smile while throwing a glance at Gray. Gray was surprised when he saw lightning flashing quickly in the eyes of the man. "Oh, he also has the lightning element," he thought. He nodded to the man before focusing his attention on the map. If he was able to acquire the lightning tree, it would depend on Reynolds if he wanted to share it with the couple or not. Gray wasn't interested in taking a share, since splitting the tree would greatly reduce the lightning essence it had stored up for so long. This was something he learned from the books he read. This was also why he didn't trust the young man who asked him to team up with him. Everyone would naturally want to refine the tree at its best state. After the leader of the expedition finished speaking to them, they immediately set off into the forest. Once they get to where the lightning tree was located, it would be every man for themselves. One of the other groups entered the forest a few minutes after the guild entered. The group the young man came with was the last to step into the forest. The young man had a smirk on his face as he took a step into the forest. In the forest, Gray's group didn't go far before they encountered magical beasts. None of the beasts had gotten to the origin plane yet, so the group quickly killed them, not forgetting to remove their calls, before they continued heading deeper into the forest. After getting almost 1.5 kilometers deep into the forest, the stages of the magical beast started slowly increasing. Gray closely monitored the area, while staring at the map to see how accurate it was. Looking closely, he noticed that they had passed a few of the areas marked on the map. These areas were occupied by magical beasts at the peak of the origin plane. According to the map, they still needed to go 3 kilometers deeper before they will get to where the lightning tree was located. There were 3 larger marks around that place, so there's a chance that they might encounter magical beasts at the Overlord plane when they get to the lightning tree. They continued heading forward, fighting against the magical beasts that appeared before them. They were forced to stop after going deeper by another kilometer. Ahead of them was a pack of wind wolves. Gray looked at the map, and according to it, these wolves should be around 800 meters away from here. Looks like they moved. The man said, yes, for them to move means only one thing. An Overlord plane magical beasts chase them from their territory. The lady said, couldn't they just be roaming around? Reynolds asked. No, we've been coming here for over 10 years now, and whenever the leader of a pack moves along with them, it means they were chased by a stronger group. There are few wolf packs in this forest, and only the leader of the wind wolves had managed to reach the peak of the origin plane. The man explained. Oh, okay. Chapter 350. Everyone be careful. The leader of the expedition said to the group. The wolves had already made eye contact with them, and they were already preparing to attack. The wolf pack numbered around 25 or so. What made these wolves difficult to handle was their speed. Whoosh! The wolves were the first to attack, sending out multiple wind blades towards the group. This wasn't the first time Gray was encountering wind wolves, but these ones were the strongest. Gray and the others were able to easily dodge the attacks, but they were met with more attacks from the wolves. After the wolves' first 2 elemental attacks yielded no results, they charged at the group with their monstrous speed. Boom, bang, the group soon started a brawl with the wolves. Gray mostly focused on dodging, while keeping an eye out for Reynolds. If he sees that he's in any type of danger, then he would immediately step in to help resolve it. While the group was fighting against the wind wolves, the second group who entered the forest after them could be seen heading towards that area. When they saw the group fighting against the wolves, they stopped about 150 meters away from where the battle was going on. They watched on for a minute or so, before taking another route. The last group also came along, but just like the previous one, they followed another route, so as not to get involved with the current ongoing battle. But the sudden change in the position of the wind wolves showed them they couldn't use the previous knowledge they had of this place. Currently, there's a chance that any of the groups might just encounter an Overlord plane magical beast out of its usual territory. After the group fought against the wolves for almost 20 minutes, they managed to kill over half of them without suffering any deaths from their ranks. Although some of them were injured, it was just small superficial wounds. Oh woo. The leader of the wind wolves called out to the others retreating. It was fighting against the leader of the expedition, and it had been suppressed throughout the battle. Reynolds was part of the few people who were injured. He had a gash on his right thigh, but it had already stopped bleeding for a while now. Can you walk properly with that? Gray asked when he came close to him. Yeah, just a little scratch. Reynolds nodded. You call that a scratch? Gray looked at him strangely. Haha. Don't worry about it. It'll take more than this to keep me down. Reynolds laughed. Gray shrugged before looking at the wolf corpses around the area. We should leave, the leader said, stepping over the wolf corpse in front of him. The others nodded and continued heading into the forest. They noticed the 2 other groups while they were fighting, so they knew they had to hurry up, or the expedition would be a waste of time. Gray stayed close to Reynolds, only when he noticed the wound had slowly started healing did he focus on the road ahead. He was making some slight changes to the map as they walked deeper, to make it more accurate in case the couple wanted to come in here again. As they walked deeper, they saw signs of battles in different places, but there weren't any corpses of people or magical beasts. The group tensed up as they followed the route the group ahead of them was using. Being behind them meant that they wouldn't need to worry about what was in front, since the group would have already cleared it. 1 hour later, they saw the 2 groups who passed them while they were fighting against the wind wolves. From how quickly they got here, it looked like they didn't encounter any horde of beasts. The 2 groups were standing, looking in front of them. Gray's group soon got to where they were standing. On getting there, Gray looked ahead of him, In front of them was a barren-looking land. It looked like a place that was burnt a long time ago. Gray guessed it was probably caused by the constant lightning strikes. But the land wasn't what caught his attention, it was the small glowing tree that he could see from where he was standing. Even from such distances, he could sense the essence inside. The tree was located on top of a hill. When Gray looked below the hill, he was surprised by the sheer number of magical beasts that were roaming around the hill. He could tell they were all lightning attribute beasts. The beasts were using the bits of essence that the tree was constantly releasing to improve themselves. This was almost like holy ground for these beasts. This would be great for Ray. If only there was one more, then I'd break through to the 7th stage in a matter of minutes, he thought, while shifting his attention back to the lightning tree. Hey bud, how confident are you in acquiring it? Reynolds asked silently. Before today, I'd say 60%, but now I'm 100% certain, Gray said confidently. A few people around them overheard his statement. Heh, such arrogance. A man scoffed. There's a difference between confidence and arrogance, Gray replied calmly. He was unperturbed by the looks the people were giving him, because he had been able to successfully learn the Great Void technique the previous night. He hadn't perfected it, but the little level of mastery he had of it gave him the confidence in being able to acquire the lightning tree. Gray could confidently say he was the fastest person in this place, if he were boosted with his lightning, wind, and physical prowess. Now with the inclusion of the Great Void technique, he didn't think any of these people in the origin plane would be able to stop him if he wanted to escape. The only thing he had to figure out is how Reynolds would escape. This is the end of this video. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed and wish you wonderful rest of the day. The silent Ruptors out.